My name is Elias Whittaker, and I was born into a family that has lived in the Appalachian Mountains for longer than anyone can clearly trace. If you open the brittle family Bible tucked inside our cedar chest, the records stretch back to the early 1800s, though the pages yellow and crack before you reach the first name. My grandfather used to say the Whittakers didn't come to these mountains. The mountains swallowed us whole and refused to spit us back out. That may sound like old-fashioned talk, but if you lived where we live, you would understand how much truth lingers in words spoken half in jest. The Appalachians are not just hills and trees. They are alive in ways I have never seen written down in books outsiders bring to explain us. And for generations, my family has survived here by following rules that outsiders would call strange. We do not break them. Not once. Not ever. Because the mountains remember when you do. I grew up in a small house that sat near the edge of a ridge, surrounded by dense forest that kept the sun caught in its branches most of the day. My father, Jonathan Whittaker, was a stern man with a voice that carried like a bell. He worked the land, hunted, and raised me with the same firm hand that his father had used on him. My mother, Ruth, was quiet, with eyes that never seemed surprised. She always looked as though she already knew what was coming, whether it was a storm or the first cry of a newborn calf. She believed the rules more than anyone. She treated them not as old superstitions, but as laws stronger than any sheriff's decree. The first time I was old enough to hear the rules spoken clearly, I was 7 years old. That morning, my father gathered me by the hearth, his broad hand pressing down on my shoulder to hold me steady, and recited them in the same order his father had taught him. He made me repeat each one until I could say it without stuttering. There were 10 in total. They were not written anywhere, because paper could burn and ink could fade. The rules, he said, were to be carved into my mind as if into stone. Rule 1. When you hear your name called in the woods at night, do not answer. Rule 2. Never whistle after dark. Rule 3. If you find a door standing in the forest with no house around it, do not open it. Do not touch it. Do not look too long. Rule 4. When the wind dies and the forest goes silent, come inside immediately. Bolt the door. Rule 5. If you wake to find the trees closer than they were when you slept, do not go outside until daylight. Rule 6. Do not follow lights that move without source. Rule 7. If you see an animal watching you with 2 human eyes, do not acknowledge it. Walk away and do not return. Rule 8. When you kill game, leave a portion behind. The mountains always take their share. Rule 9. Do not cross running water when the moon is red. Rule 10. Never, under any circumstance, forget the other 9. At 7 years old, I repeated them with a child's obedience, not truly understanding the weight behind them. But later that night, when the forest seemed to lean against the windows and the trees knocked their long fingers on the glass, I lay awake and whispered the rules to myself until sleep finally carried me away. My family lived simply, but the mountains made every simple thing heavy. We farm-hunted and traded with the small town a valley away. Outsiders sometimes came through, hikers, drifters, or curious folk wanting to see real mountain living. Most didn't stay long. Some vanished on trails that were supposed to loop back, but never did. My father always shook his head when the sheriff or rescue teams went looking. If they broke the rules, there ain't no finding them, he'd mutter. The mountains got them now. When I was 10, I learned the rules weren't just threats meant to keep children in line. That summer, my cousin Samuel came up from Knoxville to visit. He was 2 years older than me, proud and reckless. His father had left the mountains as soon as he could and raised Samuel in the city, where he grew up thinking rules like ours were foolish superstition. He laughed when my mother reminded him not to whistle at night. He said only birds cared about whistling. My father warned him once, then twice, his voice carrying that sharp edge of finality that meant no more warnings would follow. But Samuel never liked being told what not to do. And so one night, while we lay awake on the porch listening to cicadas buzz in waves, he puckered his lips and let out a long, low whistle into the trees. The sound cut through the summer night like a knife. The insects stopped. The frogs went quiet. Even the air seemed to hold its breath. My father was through the door in less than a heartbeat, his hand gripping Samuel's shoulder, so hard I thought he'd leave a permanent bruise. He didn't shout. He didn't scold. He only said, "Inside." Now, we obeyed, though Samuel grumbled. My mother barred the door, every latch and lock drawn, and pulled the curtains tight. Then the waiting began. Silence pressed against the house. My father took his rifle from the mantel and sat by the window. He didn't move for hours, except to glance at me and Samuel with eyes that ordered us to stay put. I drifted to sleep against my mother's lap, but in the early hours, something woke me. Not a sound. There was none, but the feeling of being watched. I turned toward the window. In the sliver of space between the curtains, I saw shapes moving in the yard. Tall, too tall to be men, thin as poles, their limbs bending wrong as they walked. They circled the house, slow and deliberate, and each time one passed the window, I felt a pull in my chest, like the urge to answer a question I hadn't heard. My father never moved, though I saw the muscles in his jaw tighten. He knew better than to shoot. You cannot shoot the mountain's children. You can only wait for dawn to drive them back. Samuel never whistled again. He left the next morning, pale and shaky, and never visited after that. I never asked him what he saw that night, though sometimes I wonder if it was the same as what I did. But in truth, I didn't need his answer. I had learned mine. The rules were not warnings, they were survival. As the years passed, the rules guided everything we did. If the woods called my name, I pulled the blanket over my head and held my breath. If I hunted deer, I always left a portion by the stump at the edge of the clearing. If I saw a door freestanding in the pines, its wood warped and handle gleaming with no house around it, I kept my eyes low and walked faster, pretending I hadn't noticed. I never crossed running water on nights when the moon burned red like rust. And when the silence came, that heavy, absolute silence where even your own breathing sounded too loud, I dropped whatever I was doing and went inside, no matter the time of day. Still, knowing the rules didn't mean I always understood them. My father said they were older than memory, passed down from when the first settlers realized the mountains were not empty. He claimed they had been taught by whispers and signs, a bargain struck between human stubbornness and the hunger of the land. "You can't beat the mountain," he said once as we chopped wood, "but you can make it let you live if you pay respect. Break the rules, though, and it'll take back what it gave." When I was 16, I thought I was ready to challenge those words. Teenagers are fools that way. I'd grown tall, broad-shouldered, with the kind of confidence that comes from never having truly lost anything. My friends in town whispered about spirits and old tales, but they also rolled their eyes at our rules, saying no one had seen proof in years. They said the Whitakers were just stubborn hill folk, clinging to stories to scare children. For the first time, I let doubt take root. And that summer I learned why doubt in the mountains is more dangerous than any wild animal. It was August when I decided to test a rule. I told myself I would only bend it, not break it. I wanted to prove to myself, and maybe to my father, that I wasn't just a child parroting words. The rule I chose was Rule 6. Do not follow lights that move without source. It seemed the easiest to mock. Everyone had seen fireflies dart through the trees. Everyone had seen lanterns carried by hunters. Why should I believe that a moving light meant danger? I told myself I would follow one, just long enough to see who or what carried it. Then I would return, satisfied that I had faced the mountain and come back whole. The night I chose was muggy, the air thick and damp. I left the house after my parents fell asleep, carrying only a small knife and the stubbornness of youth. The forest felt restless, branches twitching though the air was still. Then I saw it, a pale glow weaving between the trees. Not the quick blink of fireflies, not the steady beam of a lantern. It pulsed slow, like a heartbeat, drifting deeper into the woods. My own heart pounded as I stepped after it. I told myself I would only go a few paces. But the light drew me on, always just far enough to keep me chasing. My feet carried me down slopes I didn't recognize, across stones slick with moss, past trees I could not name. The light stayed ahead, pulsing steady. When I tried to stop, my chest tightened, the same pull I had felt that night Samuel whistled. It urged me forward, whispering without sound. I do not know how long I walked. Time in the mountains has a way of bending when you stray from the rules. But when the glow finally paused, I found myself in a clearing I had never seen before, though our family had walked these woods for generations. The grass was too green, shimmering faintly even in the dark, and in the center stood a door. It was freestanding, no frame, no house, no wall, just a wooden door, tall and old, its handle wrought iron and cold in the moonlight. And I realized then, with a sick twist in my gut, that I had broken two rules at once. I stood there frozen, the pale glow pulsing behind me, and the door looming ahead. My father's voice echoed in my mind, stern and unyielding. If you find a door standing in the forest with no house around it, do not open it. Do not touch it. Do not look too long. And here I was, having followed a light I should have ignored, standing before exactly what I had been warned about since I was a child. My breath grew shallow. The forest around me was wrong, too quiet, too still, the air heavy as if holding its lungs. Even the bugs, which never stopped their summer drone, had fallen silent. The glow that had lured me there flickered once more, then vanished. I was left in the clearing alone, with only the door between me and the unknown. Its surface was carved with deep lines, almost like veins, and the longer I stared, the more it seemed they shifted, rearranging into shapes I nearly recognized before they slid away. A pattern formed and dissolved again, like something breathing beneath the wood. My hand twitched at my side, wanting to reach for the handle. A voice in the back of my skull told me it would be easy, that I had already come this far, that there was no harm in just a glance inside. But then another memory cut through, my cousin Samuel's pale face, after that night of whistling, his eyes hollow, his hands trembling even when he gripped the railing of our porch. He had never spoken of what he saw, but his silence was its own warning. And I thought of my mother, who barred the windows with shaking hands, who whispered prayers while my father sat steady with his rifle, daring the night to try him. The rules weren't made for convenience. They were made for survival. I stumbled backward, tearing my gaze away from the door, forcing myself not to look at it again. My chest hurt from holding my breath, and every instinct screamed at me to run. But the forest wasn't the same as it had been when I entered. The trees bent in unfamiliar ways, crowding close, their trunks so tight together I could barely see a path. I turned in circles, and no direction seemed right. The clearing pressed in, and though I kept my eyes from the door, I felt it looming behind me, waiting for me to falter. I chose a direction at random and forced my legs to move, pushing through branches that clawed at my skin. My knife, useless against what lurked here, was clenched in my hand like a charm. The woods groaned with sounds that didn't belong, creaks and low sighs. like the forest itself was watching me leave. Each step seemed to echo, though I was moving across damp earth. And once, faintly, I thought I heard my name whispered from behind, carried on a breath of air that touched my neck. I ran. I didn't care if I made noise. I ran until my lungs burned and the world tilted with dizziness. The trees stretched in endless lines, each one identical to the last, each shadow bending in unnatural angles. I no longer knew if I was moving toward home or deeper into something else entirely. Just when panic threatened to break me, the silence cracked. Somewhere ahead, the cicadas started again, their rhythmic buzz a lifeline pulling me out of that heavy stillness. I stumbled toward the sound, clawing my way through brush, until I spilled onto a path I recognized. It was the trail near our old hunting ground, a half-mile from our house. Relief hit so hard I nearly sobbed. I forced myself to slow, to breathe, to listen. The night sounds were back, honest and familiar. Still, I didn't stop moving until I saw the glow of our lantern in the window. I crept inside and barred the door, my chest heaving, sweat soaking my shirt. My father was awake, sitting in his chair like he always did when something was wrong. His eyes met mine, and he didn't need to ask where I had been. He saw it on me, the fear, the wrongness, the stain of breaking rules. He rose, slow and heavy, and set his hand on my shoulder. For a long moment, he said nothing. Then his voice came low and steady. "You went after it." I couldn't answer. My throat locked up, words strangled in shame. "You saw the door." His tone was not questioning, it was fact. I nodded. My father closed his eyes, breathing deep like the weight of generations pressed harder onto his chest. When he opened them, there was no anger. Only the grim certainty of a man who had seen this before. "You're alive," he said at last. "That's more than most who break two rules can say. You listen now, Elias. You do not speak of what you saw. You do not look for it again. The mountain doesn't forgive twice." I wanted to ask questions. What would have happened if I had opened the door? Why it had appeared to me? Why the lights come at all? But the words stuck. Deep down, I knew answers wouldn't save me. Only obedience would. For weeks afterward, I couldn't shake the feeling that something followed me. At night, I dreamed of the clearing, of the door, of hands pressing against the wood from the other side. Sometimes, in the early hours, I swore I saw a glow moving between the trees beyond my window. But I never followed it again. I shut my eyes and repeated the rules until exhaustion dragged me back to sleep. Life moved on in its quiet rhythm. My father worked the land. My mother tended the garden and stitched torn clothes. I hunted, chopped wood, traded with town. The ordinary and the strange existed side by side, as they always had. But a seed of unease grew in me. I realized the rules weren't just for protection. They were a bargain. We lived in the mountains, and in return, the mountains let us live. Break the pact, and the balance tipped. That truth sank deeper the winter I turned 17. Snow came early that year, heavy and sharp. Our crops had yielded poorly, and hunting grew scarce. Hunger pressed against our walls. One evening, my father and I tracked a buck across the ridges for hours. When I finally brought it down with a clean shot, relief surged through me. It would feed us for weeks. But as we dressed the carcass, my father reminded me of Rule 8. When you kill game, leave a portion behind. The mountains always take their share. We carved a hindquarter and left it by a stone outcropping, as tradition demanded. I remember staring at the meat lying in the snow, steam rising from it, feeling the raw weight of what we were giving up. Hunger clawed at my gut, but my father's steady gaze left no room for protest. We trudged home with what remained, cold biting our skin, the mountains watching. That night, scratching echoed on the walls of our house. Long, deliberate strokes, as though claws traced the wood. My father sat with his rifle again, his eyes hard. He told us to stay inside no matter what. Through the window's crack, I glimpsed shapes in the snow, broad-shouldered, moving on four legs, but taller than any wolf should be. Their eyes gleamed faintly, too intelligent, fixed on the house. They circled, sniffing, waiting. My mother whispered that they came to see if we had honored the rule. I pressed close to her, every hair on my body standing on end. When dawn broke, they were gone. In their place, deep prints marred the snow, wider than my hand, leading back into the woods. My father opened the door, his jaw set tight. "The share was enough," he said, almost to himself. I realized then how thin the line was between living and vanishing. Our survival didn't depend on our rifles or our gardens. It depended on respect and fear. But fear has a way of twisting as you grow. For a long time, it kept me in line. And then, slowly, it started to gnaw at me, to make me restless. I thought of those who had vanished. Hikers, hunters, even family. I wondered if they had found doors, if they had answered voices, if they had dared to question the pact. And though I told myself I would never break another rule, doubt simmered like an ember, waiting for air. It found me again the spring I turned 18. The forest had just begun to green, wildflowers pushing through damp earth. I was returning from town with supplies when I noticed the trees seemed different. Thicker, somehow, as though they had crept closer to the path since I had walked it that morning. At first, I thought it was fatigue. But then I remembered Rule 5. If you wake to find the trees closer than they were when you slept, do not go outside until daylight. But I hadn't been sleeping. I was wide awake, standing on a path that should have been open, now tightening like a noose. My heart thudded, and I quickened my pace. The trees leaned in, shadows swallowing the trail, the air stifling. Branches brushed against my arms, though I stayed in the center. And faintly, behind me, I heard footsteps, perfectly matched to mine. I didn't dare look back. I only ran, supplies clattering on my shoulders, until the trees thinned and the valley opened before me. When I burst into the yard of our home, breath ragged, my father was already outside, his face pale beneath his weathered skin. He looked past me, toward the trail, and muttered words I couldn't catch. Then he grabbed me by the arm, hauled me inside, and barred the door. That night, silence fell heavy again. Too heavy, and when the silence comes, you do not test it. You hide, and you wait. That night, when the silence fell, it pressed against our house like a weight too heavy to bear. Even the crackle of the fire seemed swallowed before it could reach our ears. My mother held her hands in her lap, knuckles white, lips moving in prayers I couldn't quite hear. My father sat with his rifle again, though he never once pointed it toward the window. He always said bullets didn't matter when the mountain wanted something. The only weapon worth holding was obedience. I tried to stay calm, but the longer the silence stretched, the louder my own heartbeat became, until it sounded like a drum the whole forest must hear. Then the knocking started. It wasn't on the door, but along the walls, slow and deliberate, circling the house like a hand dragging along the wood. Every few seconds, the knock shifted higher, lower, always moving. I stared at the ceiling, forcing myself not to cry. My father's voice came low. "Don't move. Don't speak. Don't answer." The knocking stopped at the window beside me. I couldn't help it. I looked. What I saw still twists my stomach to remember. A face hovered there, inches from the glass. Not human, but not animal either. Its eyes were wide, dark, and bottomless, but within them moved faint sparks of light, shifting like distant lanterns. Its mouth curved too far, stretching into something that might have been a smile. The glass fogged with its breath, though the air outside was too cold for fog. I froze, praying it hadn't seen me, but then it spoke. My own voice came from its mouth. "Elias, let me in. Every muscle in my body locked. It was perfect, my tone, my cadence, the way I said my own name. My father's eyes snapped toward me, hard and warning. I wanted to answer, to scream, to deny that it was me, but the rule burned in my skull. When you hear your name called in the woods at night, do not answer. I bit my tongue until I tasted blood, my jaw shaking. The thing's face pressed harder against the glass, warping, stretching. It whispered my name again and again, each time a little less like me, until the last was guttural. Like the mountain itself was trying to shape my syllables through stone. Then it drifted away, and the knocking resumed, slower now, heavier, circling until the silence swallowed it once more. We didn't sleep. We didn't move. Only when dawn finally came, pale light filtering through the curtains, did my father lower the rifle. His shoulders sagged, and he looked 10 years older. "It knows you now," he said. I didn't ask what that meant. I didn't want to know. The days that followed blurred together. Work had to be done, animals fed, wood chopped, water fetched. But every time I stepped outside, I felt eyes on me, watching from between the trees. Sometimes I thought I heard faint whispers, my name, my footsteps, even my laugh, echoing in places I hadn't spoken. Once, as I filled a bucket at the creek, ripples moved against the current, spelling letters in the water ELS. I dropped the bucket and ran. I wanted to believe it was my imagination. That fear was twisting everything into shadows. But my mother's face told me otherwise. She watched me too closely, like she expected me to vanish. She left extra offerings at the stump in the clearing. Bread, apples, even a jar of honey once. My father didn't stop her. He only muttered that it wouldn't matter, not now. One night, as I lay half awake, I heard footsteps in the yard. Not circling this time, but pacing, back and forth, back and forth. Then a voice called out, soft but clear. "It's me. Elias, I'm cold. Let me in." My blood froze. It was my voice again, but I was inside, breathing shallow beneath the quilt, staring at the dark ceiling. My father rose and barred the door with his own body, pressing his weight against it, as though he expected it to burst open. My mother clutched the cross at her neck, whispering prayers faster than I could understand. The voice outside continued, steady, calm, patient. "I'm cold. I'm hungry. Open the door. Please. You know me. I'm you." I don't know how long it went on. Hours, maybe. The voice never grew angry, never shouted. It was worse that way, gentle, coaxing, familiar. When the sun finally rose, silence returned. We opened the door to find the yard untouched, no prints in the frost, no sign of anyone at all. I thought that would be the end of it. But the mountain doesn't let go once it takes interest. The rules keep you alive, but once you've brushed too close, you're marked. That's what I came to understand, and I had brushed too close twice. Following lights, staring at the door. A week later, I went to town for flour and salt. On the way back, I noticed the trees leaning again, crowding the path. My chest tightened, but I forced myself to keep walking. Then I heard it. Footsteps behind me, matching mine exactly. Every crunch of my boot echoed with another. I stopped, the echo stopped. I turned, heart hammering. Nothing. I told myself not to look again. I told myself to keep walking. But I did look once more, and what I saw was worse than footsteps. There, not 20 paces back, stood me. My own face, my own clothes, my own sack of supplies slung over its shoulder. It smiled faintly when our eyes met, and then it raised its hand and waved. I dropped the sack and ran. Branches whipped my face. Roots caught my feet, but I didn't stop. I didn't look back again. When I finally reached home, chest burning, I slammed the door and locked it. My father demanded to know what I had seen, but I couldn't speak. I only shook my head, gasping like a drowning man. That night, the scratching returned. This time, it wasn't around the house. It was above. On the roof, my father stood with his rifle, staring up at the ceiling, while my mother wept silently into her hands. I pressed myself into the corner, trying to make myself small, invisible. The scratching grew louder, heavier, until dust rained from the rafters. Then came the voice again. Mine. I'm here. I'm inside. But it wasn't. Not yet. The noise lasted until dawn, and then it stopped. My father sat down hard, his face ashen, eyes hollow. He looked at me like a man watching a fire spread across dry woods, powerless to stop it. You've got its attention, he said. That's worse than death. I begged him to tell me what it wanted, what I should do, how to make it stop. But he only shook his head. There's no rule for this. Once it knows your name, once it wears your skin. He didn't finish. For the first time, I saw fear in my father's eyes. Real fear. The days blurred again. I stopped sleeping, afraid of what dreams might come. The mirror in my room grew unbearable. Each time I glanced, I thought the reflection lingered a moment too long. Its smile not quite mine. Once when I leaned close, I swear its lips moved though mine were still. I covered the mirror with cloth, but that didn't stop the feeling. My father tried to keep me close, sending me only on short tasks, never alone. But the mountain doesn't care for human plans. One evening, while chopping wood by the shed, I felt a presence behind me. I turned, and there I was again, standing in the yard, watching. Its smile was wide, too wide, stretching until the skin cracked. My axe slipped from my hands. The thing tilted its head, and in my voice, it whispered, "Soon." Then it stepped back into the trees, vanishing without sound. I staggered inside, shaking, barely able to speak. My father listened, jaw clenched. At last, he said, "It's not just the mountain anymore. It's chosen you." I demanded to know what that meant, what it wanted from me, but he wouldn't say. My mother wept again, her prayers spilling faster. I began to understand that some knowledge was too dangerous to carry. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat by the window, staring into the trees, waiting for movement. Around midnight, I saw the glow again. The same pale pulse that had lured me once before. It moved between the trunks, slow, patient, inviting. My body ached to follow, every muscle straining forward. I gripped the chair with white knuckles, forcing myself still. The glow pulsed brighter, then dimmed, then vanished. But a voice remained, drifting through the glass, low and steady. My voice, from the woods. "You can't hide forever, Elias. The rules won't save you now." And I believed it. The days that followed blurred into a kind of waking fever. I moved through them with a hollow chest, as if my heart no longer belonged to me, but to something else that had claimed it. The rules, the old safety net, no longer felt solid. They were like thin threads fraying between my fingers. I kept repeating them under my breath, whispering them while fetching water, while feeding the animals, while lying awake at night. But each time I felt less certain. I had broken too, and then I had been seen. The rules could protect the careful, the obedient. But what protection was there for the marked? My father's face grew older by the day. He barely slept, his eyes sunken, beard unkempt, as though keeping watch for me took every bit of him. My mother avoided my gaze altogether. When I caught her watching me, her eyes were wide and glassy, as if she were not sure which Elias she was looking at, the son she had raised or the thing in the woods that now wore my voice. One evening, I overheard them arguing in the kitchen. Their voices were hushed but sharp, slicing through the stillness. "He won't last," my father said. "It's got him." "There must be something," my mother whispered. "There must be a way to bargain." "You don't bargain with it."
You know that?
Her voice cracked. "He's our son." I pressed my back against the wall, the words sinking like stones in my stomach. I wanted to storm in, to demand answers, but I was afraid of what I might hear. afraid they might not be speaking about me at all, but about the other Elias, the one whispering from the trees. That night, the silence returned. Heavy, absolute. We barred the doors and waited, the way we always did. But instead of the scratching or the circling footsteps, a knock sounded at the front door. 3 sharp raps like a polite visitor. My blood turned cold. My father raised the rifle, but his hands shook. Then came my voice. "It's me. Open the door, please." The knock repeated. I forgot the rules. "I'm cold. Let me in." My mother's face crumpled, and for a terrifying moment I thought she might rise, might rush to the door. I grabbed her arm, whispering desperately, "It's not me. I'm here." She clutched me back, her nails digging into my skin, but her eyes stayed fixed on the door. The voice spoke again, softer now.
"Mama."
"Please, I'm scared." Her breath hitched. Tears streamed down her cheeks. My father barked her name, low and commanding, and she snapped her gaze to him. He shook his head once, firmly. Slowly, she sank back into her chair, burying her face in her hands. The knocking went on for hours. Sometimes it was gentle, sometimes it shook the frame, rattling the hinges. My name spilled from the other side in 100 variations, pleading, laughing, sobbing, furious. I pressed my hands over my ears, rocking in my chair, but still I heard it. I think I'll always hear it. By dawn, it stopped, but something inside me had cracked. The next day I couldn't stand it anymore. The walls felt like a coffin. The silence inside the house pressed heavier than the silence of the woods. Against my father's orders, I stepped outside. He shouted after me, but I didn't turn back. I needed air. I needed to see for myself if the forest still belonged to me, or if it had already taken me. The trees stood tall, indifferent, their leaves whispering with the wind. Birds sang. The creek gurgled in the distance. Ordinary sounds. But beneath them, I felt the wrongness, the faint vibration that told me the mountains had set their eyes on me. I walked to the edge of the yard, staring into the tree line. For a long while, nothing moved. Then, deep between the trunks, I saw a figure. It was me, not moving, not waving this time, just standing watching. Even from that distance, I could see its smile. I turned away, heart slamming against my ribs, and stumbled back inside. My father was waiting, fury in his face. "Do you want to die?" he snapped. I shouted back, the words ripping free before I could stop them. "It already has me!" The silence that followed was worse than any argument. My father's jaw tightened, his eyes hollow. My mother wept again, rocking in her chair. And I realized in that moment that I was no longer just their son. I was a problem they didn't know how to solve. That night, the glow returned. I saw it through the cracks in the curtains, pulsing steadily, closer than before. My father ordered us to stay inside, but I couldn't resist. Something in my chest ached, pulling me toward it. I slipped from my bed, crept to the window, and peered out. The glow hovered at the edge of the yard, shifting gently like it breathed. Then it split. One light became 2. 2 became 4. They drifted apart, weaving between the trees, forming a pattern. My breath caught when I realized what it was. A door. They outlined its shape in the darkness, tall and narrow, the air within them shimmering faintly. My stomach twisted. I backed away, stumbling over the chair, the crash waking my father. He grabbed me, his grip iron, shaking me. "Did you look at it?" I tried to deny it, but the truth was etched on my face. His eyes closed, and for the first time I saw him look defeated. "Then it's too late," he whispered. I begged him to explain, but he only shook his head. My mother clung to me, sobbing, pressing her face against my chest like she could hold me here by force. But her arms felt weak, and her prayers faltered on her lips. The next day, my father took me deep into the woods. He said nothing at first, only walked, his boots crunching against the soil. We reached a clearing I didn't recognize. where an ancient oak split into 3 massive trunks. At its base sat a stone, carved with markings I couldn't read. He told me our family had carried its burden for generations, that once the mountain chose one of us, nothing could change it. The only mercy left was not to fight but to endure. I asked him what that meant, but he didn't answer. He only placed his hand on my shoulder, heavy and trembling. Remember the rules, even now. Especially now. They're all you have left. We returned home in silence. That night, I dreamed of the door again. This time it was not in the clearing, not in the woods. It was inside our house. Standing in the hallway, tall and dark, its iron handle gleaming. I knew better than to touch it. I knew better than to look too long. But still I did, and from the other side my voice whispered. Soon, I woke drenched in sweat, my throat raw as though I had been calling out in my sleep. My mother sat beside me, eyes red from crying. She stroked my hair and whispered, "We'll keep you as long as we can." Her words chilled me more than any dream. The days stretched thin. Each one bled into the next, each night heavier with silence. Sometimes I caught myself speaking without meaning to, muttering my own name, whispering to the trees. My father watched me with suspicion now, his rifle always within reach. My mother clung to me still, but her prayers had changed. They sounded less like pleas for protection and more like preparations for loss. And then, one evening, as the sun bled into the ridges, the glow returned. Not at the edge of the forest, not beyond the creek. It was in the yard. I froze at the window, staring as the light pulsed steadily, brighter than ever before. It was joined by another, then another, until the whole yard shimmered with them. They drifted together, merging, shaping into the outline of a door. Its iron handle gleamed in the twilight, and from behind it, I heard my voice, clear and steady. "Elias, come home." I couldn't move when I saw it. The door standing in the yard, framed in pale light that pulsed like the beat of a heart. My voice drifted from behind it, calm, certain, without the tremble mine carried in my own throat. "Elias, come home." The words sank into me like hooks. I felt them tugging in my chest, pulling me forward. My legs twitched with the urge to obey, to step outside and reach for that handle. It wasn't just temptation. It was compulsion, like thirst after days in the sun. Like the hunger that gnaws at you in the dead of winter. My father's hand clamped down on my shoulder, fingers digging in hard enough to bruise. "Don't you move," he growled, his voice low and fierce. I couldn't answer. My tongue felt swollen, useless. My mother whimpered behind us, clutching her cross so tightly the chain snapped. The door pulsed brighter, the glow seeping into the cracks of our house, painting the walls with shifting shadows. The handle gleamed like an eye-catching firelight. Then came the knocking. 3 sharp raps, not on our door but on that one outside. Each knock echoed in my bones, as if my ribs were hollow wood struck by a hammer. I wanted to scream, to beg my father to shoot, to do anything, but all I could do was stare. The voice came again, gentler this time. "You've been gone too long, Elias. Don't you miss yourself?" My father yanked me backward, dragging me away from the window. He shoved me into the chair by the hearth and stood over me, rifle in hand, eyes blazing with fury and fear. "You do not look again," he ordered. "Do you hear me? You do not listen. It is not you. It never was." But his words couldn't untangle the knot in my chest, because part of me believed it. Part of me thought that maybe I was the imitation, the shadow, the thing pretending to be Elias, while the real one waited behind that door. The knocking went on through the night, sometimes sharp, sometimes soft, always patient. It didn't fade until dawn, when the light broke over the ridges and the yard lay empty once more. No door, no glow, no prints in the grass, only silence, heavy and expectant. My father collapsed into his chair, rifle across his knees. His eyes were bloodshot, his voice ragged. It won't stop now. Not until it takes you. My mother knelt beside me, her hands trembling as she gripped mine. We'll fight it, she whispered. We'll keep you. But her eyes betrayed her. Wet, desperate, shining with the knowledge that promises meant nothing here. The next days felt like a slow unspooling. I tried to work, to carry wood, to mend traps, to live as though nothing had changed. But everywhere I went, I saw glimpses. A figure ducking between trees, a shadow where none should fall, a ripple in water that spelled out my name. Once, in the corner of my eye, I saw myself step from behind the shed, smiling. When I turned, the yard was empty. Sleep abandoned me. Each time I closed my eyes, I dreamed of the door. It followed me now, shifting places, sometimes in the clearing, sometimes in our hallway, once even at the foot of my bed, always with the same iron handle, always with the same voice drifting from behind it. Come home. I stopped speaking much. My voice felt foreign in my own ears, too close to the one calling from the dark. My mother hovered over me, her hands fluttering uselessly, her prayers growing hoarse. My father grew harsher, barking orders, snapping when I hesitated, as if keeping me busy might keep me safe. But at night, I heard him pacing the floor, muttering to himself, voice cracked with fear he couldn't show me. Then came the night when the silence fell heavier than ever before. No wind, no insects, no creak of branches. Just a stillness so thick it pressed against my skin. We bolted the doors, shuttered the windows, and gathered by the fire. My father sat with the rifle, my mother clutching her broken cross, me staring at the flames as though they could burn the shadows away. And then the door appeared inside. It stood against the far wall, taller than the ceiling should allow, its frame pressing into the beams, its surface breathing with faint pulses of light. The handle gleamed. My voice drifted from behind it, clear and certain. Elias, you can't hide. You're already mine, my mother screamed. My father raised the rifle, aiming at the door, but his hands shook so violently the barrel wavered. I stood, though I didn't remember moving, my legs carrying me toward it. Each step felt inevitable, like walking into the current of a river too strong to fight. My father roared my name, lunging to grab me, but the floor seemed to stretch between us. The fire dimmed, the walls bent, and all I could see was the handle gleaming inches from my hand. My own voice whispered from the other side, softer now, intimate, like a secret. You've been waiting, haven't you? Let me in. My fingers brushed the iron. A blast shattered the silence. My father's rifle cracked, the sound deafening in the warped room. The door shuddered, the glow flickered, and for the first time, the voice faltered. I stumbled backward, gasping, clutching my ears as the world bent and snapped back. When I blinked, the door was gone. Only smoke from the rifle barrel hung in the air, acrid and heavy. My father lowered the gun, his chest heaving, sweat streaming down his face. You don't touch it, he rasped. Not ever, but I already had. Even that brief brush, that fleeting contact lingered like a burn on my skin. The days after blurred into a fever haze. My mother barely let go of me, hovering, whispering prayers, weeping when she thought I couldn't hear. My father grew harsher still, his voice cracking with desperation. He made me recite the rules again and again, until my throat ached, until the words lost meaning. But I obeyed, clinging to them like a rope dangling above a pit. Still, I knew it was only a matter of time. One morning, as I fetched water from the creek, I caught my reflection in the current. At first it was normal, my own wary face staring back. Then its lips curled into a smile, while mine did not. It whispered, faint but clear, beneath the bubbling water. Tonight, I dropped the bucket and ran. That evening I tried to stay awake, to fight the pull, but exhaustion crushed me. My dreams carried me back to the door, waiting in the clearing, the glow spilling across the ground. My voice drifted from behind it, soft and patient. "It's time, Elias."
Come home.
When I woke, I was no longer in my bed. I was standing barefoot in the yard, the grass damp with dew, the door looming before me. My hand hovered inches from the handle. My father's shout split the night, raw and furious. "Elias!" I snapped awake fully, stumbling back, heart racing. My father barreled toward me, rifle in hand, eyes wild. He grabbed me, dragging me inside, slamming the door, barring it with trembling hands. My mother sobbed into her hands, rocking back and forth. My father turned to me, his face hollow, his voice breaking. "It won't stop, boy. Not until you go through. The rules kept us alive this long, but they can't keep you from what's claimed you." I wanted to scream at him, to demand why he hadn't told me sooner, why he had let me believe the rules were enough, but no words came. Only the cold certainty that he was right. That night the door knocked until dawn. By the time dawn broke, my body felt hollow, as though the knocking had shaken everything out of me and left only an empty shell. My father hadn't slept. He sat in his chair, rifle across his knees, his eyes rimmed in red. My mother rocked silently in the corner, whispering words too low to hear. I couldn't look at either of them. I stared at my hands instead, watching the faint tremor that never seemed to stop. It didn't feel like fear anymore. It felt like something in me was being pulled, slowly, surely, toward that door. The day passed without speech. We ate in silence, if you could call it eating. My mother pushing bread around her plate, my father swallowing mechanically, me barely able to choke anything down. The air in the house felt tight, heavy with waiting. Each creak of the floorboards, each whisper of wind through the cracks, made us flimple. The mountains were patient. They always had been. But I could feel their patience thinning, like the final stretch of rope before it snaps. When night came, the silence fell thicker than ever. We barred the doors, latched the windows, and gathered around the fire. I repeated the rules to myself, whispering them under my breath like a prayer. But the words felt brittle now, powerless. They were meant to protect those who stayed obedient, who never broke them. I had already failed. The rules weren't ropes strong enough to pull me back. They were only reminders of how far I had strayed. The glow appeared in the yard again, brighter than ever. It seeped through the shutters, washing the room in pale light. My father raised the rifle, but his hands trembled too badly to keep it steady. My mother clutched my arm, tears running silently down her cheeks. Then the knocking began, slow and deliberate. This time it was not just 3 raps. It was steady, unrelenting, like a heartbeat pounding through the wood. My voice drifted from outside, calm and patient. "Elias, it's time." I pressed my hands over my ears, but it didn't matter. The voice was inside my head now, woven into my bones. My mother sobbed harder, rocking me like a child, whispering, "Stay, stay, stay." My father shouted something, words lost in the roar of blood in my ears. The knocking grew louder, the glow brighter, until it felt like the house itself would split in two. And then the door appeared inside again. It rose from the floorboards, taller than the ceiling, its frame bending the walls around it. The handle gleamed in the firelight, casting long, warped shadows across the room. The glow pulsed through its surface, and my voice came from behind it, steady, certain. "Come home." My mother screamed and clutched me tighter. My father raised the rifle and fired. The shot echoed through the house, smoke filling the air, but the door didn't shudder this time. The glow only pulsed brighter, and the voice laughed, a sound that was mine and not mine, rolling like thunder. The rifle fell from my father's hands. His shoulders slumped, his eyes hollow. "I can't stop it," he whispered. "Not anymore?" I tried to resist. I clung to the chair, to the floorboards, to my mother's arms, but my body betrayed me. My legs moved on their own, pulling me toward the door. My hands trembled as they reached forward. My mother shrieked and held me, but the pull wrenched me free, dragging me step by step closer to the handle. My father shouted my name, his voice raw, but even he didn't move to stop me. Maybe he knew it was useless. Maybe he had seen this before, in another generation, another son claimed by the mountains. The handle was cold when my fingers closed around it. The glow surged, blinding, washing the room in light. My mother's scream tore through the air. My father's voice broke into a sob, and then I pulled. The door swung open. I can't explain what I saw on the other side. Words fail. It wasn't darkness, but it wasn't light. It wasn't a place, but it wasn't void. It was me, standing there smiling, my eyes looking back into mine, my mouth curved in that too wide grin. And behind me, behind him, shadows moved, shapes too tall, too thin, bending wrong as they circled in silence. The mountains themselves seemed to breathe there, alive and endless. My other self stepped forward, reaching out a hand. "You've kept me waiting long enough." I felt myself move, though I didn't command it. My hand lifted, my body leaned. The pull was irresistible, like falling into a river's current. I stumbled across the threshold. The glow swallowed me whole. For a heartbeat, I thought I heard my mother's scream, my father's broken sob. Then even those were gone. I don't remember what happened next in any clear sense. Time bent. Moments stretched and snapped. Sometimes I felt like I was walking, sometimes like I was floating, sometimes like I was standing still while the world moved around me. The other Elias walked beside me, smiling, speaking in a voice that was mine but fuller, richer, more certain. I can't recall his words, only the cadence, steady and inescapable, threading through my mind like roots burrowing into soil. When I woke, or thought I woke, I was back in the mountains. The ridges stretched around me, the forest thick and alive. The air smelled the same, damp and sharp, but the colors were wrong. Too vivid, too sharp, as though the world had been stripped and repainted with hues I wasn't meant to see. The trees leaned in close, their trunks twisted, their branches dripping with something that pulsed faintly like veins. The silence here wasn't heavy, it was absolute. And I wasn't alone. They stood among the trees, the shapes I had glimpsed before, tall and thin, their limbs bending in ways that broke sense. Their eyes glowed faintly, lantern sparks in endless dark. They moved without sound, circling, watching, patient. I knew then what my father had meant. Once the mountain takes interest, there's no turning back. The other Elias smiled wider, his teeth too sharp. "This is home." I wanted to scream, but no sound came. My throat locked, my voice stolen. And then I realized I could still hear a voice. Not as mine, but it wasn't coming from me. It was coming from somewhere else. Faint, muffled, distant. It was coming from the house. I saw it as though through a veil. The old cabin, my mother on her knees by the hearth, my father slumped in his chair, and me, my body, standing in the doorway, calm, steady, whole. My voice spoke with ease, soothing, certain. "It's all right. I'm here." They believed it. They wanted to believe it. And I understood. The thing that had taken me didn't leave emptiness behind. It left a replacement. A shadow that wore my skin, spoke my voice, lived my life. My parents would never know the difference. They would carry on, thinking they had kept me, while I remained here, in this place that was not place, with the others who had been taken. I tried to fight, to scream, to claw my way back, but the mountains held me tight. The rules had always been simple: do not answer, do not whistle, do not touch, do not look. I had broken them one by one, and now I was the cautionary tale, the proof of why the rules existed at all. The others circled closer. their eyes gleaming. The other Elias stood beside me, his hand resting on my shoulder, heavy as stone. "Don't fight it," he whispered. "You're part of it now. The mountain remembers." And I knew he was right. The last thing I saw before the glow swallowed me whole was my mother's face, smiling faintly at the thing she thought was her son. And then I was gone. My name is Adrian Mercer. I was 26 years old when I accepted a night shift position at a remote lodge in the Canadian Rockies. And though I had taken jobs in isolation before, I had never encountered anything quite like what I found there. I am stating my name formally because the memory of that winter still clings to me, and if I am to tell this in full, I want to be clear that it was me, Adrian Mercer, who lived through it. There is no exaggeration in this account, no embellishment, only what I saw, what I heard, and what I felt when I was alone in those mountains at night. The lodge sat on the edge of a frozen lake, reachable by snowmobile or a narrow road that was plowed once a week. Guests came mostly in summer for hiking and fishing, but in winter the building stood nearly empty, a husk of wood and stone that seemed older than it should have been. The owner, a heavyset man named Carver, told me the pay would be good, considering all I had to do was watch the lobby, keep the generator running, and walk the halls a few times each night. The days were covered by one other employee, a woman who did housekeeping, but the nights were mine alone. "It gets quiet out here," Carver said, his eyes glinting under his fur hood, "but quiet is good. Nothing to worry about in quiet." I remember thinking his smile didn't match his words. The first night was uneventful. Snow battered the windows, the generator thrummed through the floorboards, and the old wood creaked like it was breathing. I made rounds at midnight, flashlight in hand, my boots sinking into rugs patterned with fading moose and pine trees. Room after room stood empty, beds made, curtains drawn tight. I locked each door after I checked, though no one was there to disturb them. Down in the lobby, the fire in the stone hearth died low, and I fought sleep by making lists in my notebook. Supplies, chores, things to ask Carver. It was the second night when I noticed something strange. While walking the third-floor corridor, I saw a smear on the frosted window at the end. I thought at first it was condensation, but when I leaned close, I realized it was a word, traced in the fog by a fingertip. It said, "Oent." Just that, nothing else. The air in the hall was icy, colder than anywhere else in the building, and though I wiped the glass clean with my sleeve, I couldn't shake the chill that climbed into my chest. The following night, I heard footsteps above me while I sat in the lobby at 2 a.m. There was no fourth floor, only the sloped roof and the attic used for storage. The steps went slow, deliberate, heel to toe, crossing from one end of the ceiling to the other. I told myself the wind could carry sound strangely, that old timber shifted under snow, but when I went up to check, flashlight cutting through dust, I found only trunks and moth-eaten linens. No footprints marked the floor. By the end of the week, the lodge felt less like a building and more like a presence. The walls sighed, doors clicked open by themselves, and at times I caught the faint smell of pine smoke in empty rooms. The worst was the elevator. It wasn't supposed to be running. Carver had told me the pulley system was old and unreliable, so we kept it shut down. Yet twice I found the doors open on different floors, the bulb inside buzzing, the carpet damp as if someone had stepped out into the hall. Each time, the panel lights glowed faintly, stuck on the number 3. I confronted Carver about it during his weekly visit with supplies. He set 2 crates of canned goods on the counter, grunted, and barely looked at me as I described what I'd seen. Finally, he said, "Best not to pay attention. Lodge is old. Old things do what they do." His answer made no sense, and when I pressed, He fixed me with a look that cut short any more questions. It was then I realized I was truly on my own during the nights. Sleep came harder. Every time I drifted off in the lobby chair, I dreamed of the lake outside, the ice shifting, something dark moving beneath it. In the dream, I would press my ear to the frozen surface and hear voices calling upward, muffled but insistent, begging to be let in. When I woke, my throat felt raw, as if I had been speaking with them. On the 10th night, I decided to leave the fire burning higher to keep the shadows from crowding in. As I gathered wood from the stack by the hearth, I heard the elevator ding. The sound was soft but unmistakable, the brass chime of old mechanics. I froze, every nerve awake, before I forced myself to step into the hall. The elevator stood open at the far end, its light glowing pale yellow. Inside, the floor was wet again, drops of water trailing out onto the carpet. I raised my flashlight, followed the damp footprints down the corridor, and stopped when I saw they led to room 309. That door should have been locked. I carried the master key with me at all times, and no guest was checked in. But as I drew closer, I saw the handle was turned downward. The door cracked an inch wide. My breath fogged the air as I nudged it open. The room lay in darkness except for moonlight spilling through the curtains. On the bed lay the impression of a body, the sheets pressed down in the shape of a back, shoulders, legs. Yet the bed was empty. The mattress rose slowly, as though something had just stood up and moved away. The closet door creaked. I swung the flashlight toward it, the beam trembling in my grip. Nothing but coats hung there, still and harmless. Yet from somewhere in that small, airless space, I heard a whisper, low and strained, repeating the same word over and over. Stay. I slammed the door shut, locked the room, and nearly ran down the corridor, the echo of that whisper following me all the way to the stairwell. That was when I started keeping the notebook differently. Instead of supplies and chores, I began writing times, dates, what I saw, what I heard. Each entry felt heavier than the last, as though recording it gave the events more power. But I couldn't stop myself. I needed proof, if only for my own sanity. Proof that something was happening in that lodge, something no one wanted to admit. By the 12th night, I wasn't sure what belonged to waking and what belonged to dreams anymore. I would blink at the fire and see faces in the flames, or step into the hall and find the wallpaper subtly changed, the moose pattern staring back at me with human eyes. The word returned on the window too. Not just Dion this time, but a longer phrase, traced out with wet lines. Diod, OUP. I stared at it for a long time, my breath misting the glass beside it, and I realized with a sinking in my chest that whoever, or whatever, was leaving these messages wasn't warning me to stay away. It was pleading with me, like someone desperate to stop a mistake already unfolding. I wish I had left then, but the snowstorms had grown heavier, the road long since closed, and my pride told me I could last the season. After all, the pay was good. I told myself that every night as the lodge grew stranger, as the shadows thickened and the whispers crawled closer, I told myself nothing here could truly touch me. But I was wrong. The storm outside grew worse as the night stretched on. Snow hissed against the windows like sand thrown by an unseen hand, and the lodge seemed to shrink under the weight pressing down from above. I kept the fires burning in the lobby and wrapped myself in blankets, but no amount of heat touched the cold that had taken root inside the halls. It wasn't just winter cold. It was the kind that seeped into the marrow, whispering to me in silence, convincing me I was not alone. On my 14th night, I noticed the clock in the lobby had stopped. At first I thought the batteries had died, but when I replaced them, the hands refused to move past midnight. No matter how I wound it, adjusted it, or even switched clocks with one from another room, they all froze at 12. The generator hummed steadily. The lights flickered but held. Yet time inside the lodge had decided to abandon me. I wore my wristwatch constantly after that, glancing at it every few minutes, desperate for proof that hours still passed the way they should. Carver came again for supplies. He looked tired, his cheeks red from windburn, eyes sunk deep. I asked him outright why the clock stopped, why doors unlocked themselves, why the elevator ran when it shouldn't. He set down a crate of dried food and fixed me with a stare that felt less like annoyance and more like warning. "You're not paid to ask questions," he said. "You're paid to keep watch. Do that, and you'll be fine." I wanted to argue, but his tone left no space for it. He left soon after, snowmobile engine fading into the woods, leaving me with the echo of his words. That night, I made rounds later than usual. I carried my flashlight low, trying not to startle myself with shadows. On the second floor, I stopped at room 214, though I had no reason to. The door was closed, locked like the others, but I heard something faint within, scraping like nails dragging across wood. I leaned closer, pressing my ear to the frame. The sound stopped, and a voice breathed through the crack, so close it could have been inches from me. It said, "Adrian." I staggered back, my pulse slamming through my ears. No one here knew my name except Carver. I checked the knob with trembling hands. It was locked, solid, unmoving. I forced myself down the hall, down the stairs, back to the lobby where the fire crackled like nothing was wrong. But I couldn't sit. I couldn't rest. The voice clung to me, whispering my name each time I closed my eyes. By the 18th night, I stopped counting how often I heard footsteps in empty halls. They paced slowly, circling me no matter where I stood. Sometimes they stopped just behind me, and I'd whip my flashlight around to see nothing but the patterned carpet and the faded wallpaper. Other times they followed me up stairwells, matching each step until I broke into a run. The worst was when they walked in pairs, as if 2 or 3 figures trailed me unseen, their silence heavier than the storm outside. I wrote everything down in my notebook. Times, places, words I thought I heard. The ink froze sometimes, my pen struggling against the cold, but I forced it to move. If I didn't record it, I told myself, maybe none of it would be real. Yet the notebook only thickened with proof, each line binding me tighter to the truth that something occupied the lodge alongside me. On the 21st night, the elevator doors opened again. This time I didn't hear the chime. I felt it, the vibration through the floor, the faint stirring of air as the shaft carried something upward. I followed the sound, though my legs resisted, heavy as stone. When I reached the 3rd floor, the doors stood wide. The light inside flickered weakly, casting shadows that stretched unnaturally long against the far wall. The damp footprints were there again, but this time they led not just to one room, but to every door on the corridor, as though whoever, or whatever, had tried each handle, searching. I didn't follow them. I couldn't. I shut the elevator, jammed a chair against the doors, and prayed it would hold. When I returned hours later, the chair was gone, and the doors were open again. Sleep became impossible. My body ached. My eyes burned, and still I sat awake in the lobby, the fire dwindling, waiting for the next sound. When I did manage to close my eyes, the dreams came sharper. I saw the lake, always the lake, the ice black with depth, faces pressing against it from below. They mouthed words I couldn't hear, their hands slapping against the frozen surface in slow, desperate rhythm. Once I woke with frost clinging to my fingers, as though I'd touched the ice myself. On the 25th night, something changed. The whispers grew bolder. Instead of a word here, a syllable there, I began to hear full sentences. They came from the vents, the walls, the chimneys, always hushed but clear. "Stay awake," they told me. "Don't let it in." Other times, "Go upstairs. Look, see what waits. My skin crawled each time, but curiosity gnawed harder than fear. I found myself staring at the stairwell, heart hammering, wondering what would happen if I obeyed. I lasted 2 more nights before I gave in. It was after 3 in the morning, the fire dim, my notebook heavy in my lap. The words on the window returned, faint and wet, "Gu unend, OOP." But the voices whispered otherwise, insistent, urging me to climb. I set the notebook down, grabbed my flashlight, and walked to the stairs. The first floor creaked as I left it behind. The second floor seemed empty, though I felt eyes on me from every door. On the third, the air grew colder, the silence thicker, as if sound itself refused to move. My flashlight beam wavered across doors, peeling wallpaper, the wet prints leading ahead. They stopped in front of room 309. The handle hung loose, unlocked. I knew what I would find. I had seen the shape in the bed before. But still I pushed the door open. The room looked unchanged. Moonlight through curtains, bed neatly made, air sharp with cold. But when I stepped inside, the door shut behind me with a soft click. I spun around, grabbed the knob, twisted. It wouldn't budge. My flashlight flickered, dimmed, and went out. Darkness swallowed me whole. Then the whisper came, not from a distance, but from the bed itself, rising from the pressed shape in the mattress. "Adrian," it said again, only this time the voice was mine. My exact tone, my cadence, as if I spoke to myself from inside that empty bed. I froze, throat locked, listening as it repeated my name, softer each time, until it was no more than breath against the sheets. The mattress shifted. Slowly, something invisible rose, standing, stretching tall in front of me. I couldn't see it, not even the outline, but the air bent around it, colder than before, pressing against my skin. I staggered back, hands fumbling for the door, and found it unlocked again. I bolted, running down the hall, not daring to look back. Not until I reached the stairwell and nearly collapsed against the railing. When I finally forced myself to look, the corridor behind me was empty. The doors stood closed. The carpet dry, nothing stirring. Only my own ragged breath filled the silence. Yet I knew the thing was still there, waiting, following, patient as the snow outside. I didn't sleep at all that day. I sat in the lobby, staring at the windows, at the lake beyond them, black under the weight of the storm. The faces in the ice felt closer than ever, pressing harder, their mouths opening wider, as if they had something urgent to tell me. I couldn't hear them, not yet, but I knew I would soon. I thought the storm would break. After weeks of relentless snow, I convinced myself the clouds had to give way, that sunlight would spill across the mountains, and remind me the world beyond the lodge still existed. But the storm didn't end. The days bled into nights, the sky staying the same flat gray, the drifts rising higher against the windows. The world outside was erasing itself, and I began to feel like the only thing left standing was the lodge and me within it. On the 28th night, I woke in the lobby chair with frost on my beard. The fire had burned out completely, though I didn't remember letting it die. The generator hummed faintly, the lights buzzing overhead, but everything else was still. My notebook lay open on my lap, a page filled with words I didn't remember writing. They were scrawled in my own handwriting, but jagged, hurried. Diod locine tieci maro rs. The words unsettled me more than the voices had. I rose, stiff with cold, and moved to the hallway where the lodge kept a tall mirror near the stairwell, framed in antlers. I'd passed it dozens of times without a thought. But as I approached, something felt wrong. The reflection was too dark, the angle too sharp. When I lifted the flashlight, the glass didn't show me at all. It showed the lobby behind me empty, fireless, but no trace of me standing there. My breath fogged the surface, and only then did my face appear, late, as though dragged reluctantly into place. I backed away, heart hammering, and draped a blanket over the mirror until it vanished from sight. The lodge didn't want me looking at myself, or maybe something else didn't want me to see what was standing in my place. That night, the elevator moved again. I heard it in my bones before my ears caught the sound. The cables groaning, the counterweights dragging against metal. It stopped on the first floor this time, doors sliding open just beyond the lobby. I sat frozen, watching from the fire's glow. No footprints this time, no wet carpet. Only the yawning mouth of the elevator waiting. I don't know why I stood. My legs moved without consent, carrying me across the lobby until I stood at the threshold. The light inside flickered and steadied. The panel glowed with a number that shouldn't exist. 4. There was no fourth floor. I reached out. My fingertip brushed the cold brass of the panel, and in that instant the doors slammed shut. The sound echoed through the empty lodge like a gunshot. When they opened again, the panel was dark. The bulb inside burnt out. The car nothing but shadow. I stumbled back to the fire trembling, and forced myself to stay awake until dawn, though dawn was no different from night anymore. By the 32nd night, I began hearing music, faint, scratchy, like an old record player drifting through the halls. A violin, thin and reedy, playing a tune I almost recognized but couldn't name. The melody wound through the walls, up the stairwells, seeping into the floorboards beneath my feet. I followed it once, creeping with flashlight in hand, only to find it always just ahead of me, never closer, never fading. When I gave up and turned back, I found myself on a floor I hadn't meant to climb to, the numbers on the doors unfamiliar, the wallpaper a different pattern entirely. The music stopped then, leaving me in a corridor that shouldn't have existed, until I ran and somehow tumbled back into the familiar lobby again. I didn't write that in my notebook. Not right away. I feared that committing it to paper would anchor it, give it permanence. But when I slept that morning, I dreamed of pages turning by themselves, my notebook filling with words I had not written, sentences bending around the margins until they formed the same tune I had heard in the walls. The sound of violin strings echoed in the dream, and when I woke, my ears rang as if the music had been real. The lodge was consuming me. I knew it then. It was pulling me tighter with each night, binding me to itself with whispers, with sights, with sounds that blurred the line between outside and in. My reflection lagged behind me. My handwriting betrayed me. My dreams invaded my waking hours. I wanted to leave, but the storm had buried the road entirely, and Carver hadn't returned in over a week. I checked the windows every day for snowmobile tracks, for any sign of life, but only the unbroken drift stared back. On the 35th night, I tried to fight it. I built the fire higher, filled the room with heat and light, played music from my phone to drown the whispers. For a while it worked. I almost convinced myself the lodge was just wood and stone, creaking under ice. But at 3 a.m., every fire in the building extinguished at once. The flames shriveled without smoke, without ember, leaving the rooms in instant darkness. My phone flickered and died, though it had been fully charged. And in that silence, the footsteps began again. This time not pacing, not wandering, but running, pounding down the halls toward me. I bolted for the stairwell, flashlight beam jerking wildly. But no matter how fast I moved, the footsteps stayed behind me, matching my pace closing in. I stumbled into the second floor, breath tearing my throat, and ducked into a side room. The sound stopped outside the door. I held my breath, pressed against the wall, my flashlight shaking. The knob turned once, twice, then stopped. Silence stretched on, thick and endless, before the footsteps walked away, slow and deliberate, fading into nothing. When I finally left the room, I found the notebook waiting for me on the floor of the hallway. I hadn't brought it upstairs. It lay open to a fresh page, words written in ink darker than mine. Non falas las garg. I didn't. I couldn't. I sat awake in the lobby until the gray light of morning seeped through the windows. My body ached with exhaustion. My mind frayed at the edges. I thought of the voices begging me to stay awake, warning me not to let it in. But I didn't know what it was, not fully. Only that each night drew me closer to it, whatever lived in the spaces of the lodge, in the gaps of the storm, in the reflection that wasn't mine. On the 40th night, the lake called me again. I hadn't stepped outside since the storm deepened, but the whispers pulled me to the door, to the snow-choked path that led to the shore. I bundled in layers, fought through the drifts, and reached the edge where the ice stretched flat and endless. The faces beneath the surface were clearer now. Dozens of them, pressed tight against the frozen glass, mouths moving in frantic silence. My breath fogged the air, and for a moment I thought I heard them, faint and muffled, helpless. I fell to my knees, palms flat on the ice. The surface vibrated beneath my touch, like something pounding upward from below. The faces writhed, mouths stretching wider. My own reflection stared back at me, distorted by cracks, and for the first time I saw it smile when I wasn't. I stumbled back in horror, tripping into the snow, the whispers rising sharp and shrill, until I couldn't tell whether they came from the lake or from inside my head. I ran to the lodge, slammed the door behind me, and pressed my back to the wood. The building sighed as though it had been waiting, the walls shifting, the hall stretching longer than before. I knew then that I wasn't guarding the lodge. I was trapped inside it, part of whatever cycle had played out here before me. Carver's warnings, the notes on the glass, the messages in my notebook. They weren't random. They were breadcrumbs from whoever had been here last, and maybe no one had ever left. The storm didn't just weigh on the roof anymore. It pressed on my chest, each gust like a hand forcing me deeper into the lodge. I stopped checking the windows for Carver. Stopped hoping to see the flare of headlights or the trail of a snowmobile cutting through the white. The world beyond the glass felt gone. All that mattered was what moved inside these walls, and whatever waited for me to falter. On the 42nd night, I noticed the wallpaper peeling, not in strips like old paper, but curling back in shapes that formed deliberate patterns. Circles, spirals, runes I didn't recognize. My flashlight beam caught faint stains beneath them, reddish and old, spread in smears like something had been dragged against the walls. When I blinked, the shapes seemed to shift, the spirals turning inward, drawing me closer. I touched one without thinking, and the cold of it shot up my arm like a blade of ice. My skin tingled for hours after, marked as though the wall itself had claimed me. I wrote the pattern into my notebook, hand unsteady, ink blotting the page. When I looked back an hour later, the drawing had changed. My spiral had become an eye. Its pupils stared upward, the lines curling into lashes. Beneath it, in handwriting that wasn't mine, words had formed. ITSTHROGHWOU. I tore the page out and burned it in the fireplace, but the flame sputtered and nearly died before catching. Ash floated upward, circling in the chimney draft, as though reluctant to leave. The eye lingered in my mind all night, until even when I closed my lids, I saw it staring from behind the dark. Sleep became a punishment. Every time exhaustion dragged me under, I felt myself pulled into the lake again, the faces writhing, their mouths stretching open until sound finally escaped. They didn't just beg this time, they screamed. The noise was deafening, a chorus of agony that rattled the ice and split it in fractures. I woke gasping, sheets soaked, certain I had been underwater. My lips tasted of salt, though there was no sea for hundreds of miles. By the 45th night, the lodge had begun rearranging itself. Hallways bent longer, doors opened onto different rooms than before. Once I stepped into what should have been the kitchen and found myself staring at the antler. Framed mirror from the stairwell instead, the blanket I'd draped gone. My reflection staring back too quickly again. I staggered backward, heart hammering, and when I turned, the kitchen door stood behind me, as though nothing had shifted. The violin music returned, but louder. No longer faint, it filled the halls, echoing from the rafters. I followed it against my will, my boots dragging over the rugs, until I reached the attic ladder. The sound swelled from above, each note pulling at me like a rope. My hand closed around the rung before I realized what I was doing. The wood was ice, cold, and the air from the attic smelled of damp earth, not dust. Climbed halfway before I saw movement in the gloom above. A figure hunched in the corner, bow dancing across invisible strings, head cocked at an unnatural angle. It didn't look up, didn't stop playing, but the sound burrowed into my skull until my teeth ached. I scrambled down, slammed the attic hatch shut, and dragged a dresser beneath it. Still, the violin played on through the night, a mocking lullaby I couldn't escape. On the 47th night, I heard a knock at the front door. My heart nearly broke with relief. I ran to it, fumbling with locks, and flung it open to the storm. But no one stood there. The snow on the porch was undisturbed, smooth as glass. Yet the knocking continued, 3 beats steady, insistent. I slammed the door shut and pressed my ear against the wood. The knocking sounded again, this time from inside the doorframe itself, as though the wood had hollowed to let something in. The voices from the vents grew clearer after that. They didn't whisper anymore. They spoke in fragments, different tones overlapping like a crowd. Sometimes they repeated my name. Sometimes they laughed. Other times they warned me with urgency. Don't eat. Don't drink. Don't look. Their words tangled until I couldn't tell warning from trickery. I obeyed nothing and obeyed everything, paralyzed between their demands. By the 50th night, the fire no longer kept its warmth. Flames danced bright, but the air around them was cold enough to fog my breath. I sat hunched in blankets, watching the shadows on the walls stretch into shapes that didn't belong to me. One leaned close, its arm bending across the rug, its hand resting beside mine though no one was there. I jerked back, but the handprint remained pressed into the carpet for hours, darker than the rest of the weave. I stopped writing in the notebook, fearing it more than the lodge itself. But the notebook didn't stop. I found it on the counter in the morning with new pages filled, words in cramped black ink, fty in each, fty left. Beneath it, a crude drawing of the lake split down the middle, faces spilling upward like bubbles breaking surface. My hands shook as I tore the page out, but the next morning it was back again, copied as if the lodge itself wanted me to see. On the 51st night, the elevator waited for me. Its doors stood open, light steady, the panel glowing not with 1, 2, or 3, but with they. I stood frozen, breath shallow, knowing if I stepped inside, I would not return. The voices surged in my head, some begging me to stay away, others urging me to enter. My knees weakened, every muscle pulling toward that yawning mouth. I forced myself to back away, inch by inch, until the doors slid shut with a hiss that sounded almost disappointed. That was the first time I cried. Not from fear, but from the weight of knowing I was already caught. Whatever lived in this place had me marked, measured, claimed. My name had been spoken by walls. My reflection had betrayed me. My words were no longer mine. Whether I survived the season or not no longer mattered. The lodge was remaking me in its image, night by night. By the 55th night, I hardly recognized myself in the cracked mirror above the sink. My skin looked pale as wax, my eyes sunken, my lips blue despite the blankets. When I moved, the reflection lagged, smiling faintly when I didn't. I smashed the mirror with my fist, shards scattering into the sink. But later when I returned, the glass was whole again, unbroken, waiting for me to look. The lake began to call in daylight too. I'd glance at the windows and see the faces pressed closer, their eyes wide, mouths stretching open. I knew if I went outside again, I wouldn't return. The ice would split, the water would drag me down, and I would join them in silence. Still, part of me longed for it. The relief of sinking, the release from the lodge's grip. But another part feared. That was the very fate waiting for me, that my body and soul were already halfway beneath the surface. The voices agreed. Half here, they whispered, half below, and so I sat by the fire that gave no warmth. Notebook open with words I hadn't written, listening to the violin scratching from the attic, and the elevator humming in the distance. And I understood at last that survival was not the question anymore. The question was how long I could resist becoming part of the lodge itself. By the 56th night, my body existed only as a tether to something else. My hands no longer felt like my own when I wrote in the notebook. My reflection lingered in glass. My voice echoed seconds after I stopped speaking, as though a second Adrian lived just behind me. I'd catch glimpses of movement in my peripheral vision, the outline of myself walking the opposite way down the hall. I stopped looking into mirrors, stopped listening to echoes. I was afraid one night the other me would turn and not disappear. The lodge changed further. The wallpaper spirals grew into full shapes, doors where no doors had been, stairwells leading upward into dark that smelled of wet earth. Sometimes I'd wake in the lobby chair and find myself staring down a corridor I didn't remember existing. The carpet new, the lights buzzing steady as if it had always been part of the lodge. Other times the familiar hallway shortened, doors sealed shut as if swallowed whole. I stopped making rounds because there was no point. The lodge was rewriting itself faster than I could keep track. The voices no longer whispered. They spoke in unison now, filling the vents, vibrating through the floorboards. They didn't just say my name or issue broken warnings. They told stories, tales of others before me, caretakers who had worked the night shift, who had stayed awake too long or fallen asleep too soon. Some wandered into the lake. Some rode the elevator and never came back. Some answered the music and lived in the attic now, bowing endless notes to keep the storm raging. They told me I was not the first and would not be the last. Their voices overlapped until I couldn't tell one story from another, but all ended the same way, with someone vanishing into the lodge, leaving only whispers behind. On the 60th night, the elevator chimed again. The doors opened and the panel glowed with the infinity symbol, steady, unwavering. I stood across the lobby, every muscle trembling. My other self stepped into view then, not reflection, not shadow, but solid. He looked exactly like me, but his eyes were empty, pupils drowned in black. He raised a hand, beckoned once, and walked into the elevator. The doors shut behind him. I waited for hours, heart pounding, unable to move. When the doors finally opened again, the elevator was empty, but my notebook lay on the floor inside, open to a fresh page. I picked it up with shaking hands. The words read, "Aut long nulu." The music grew unbearable after that. Day and night, the violin scraped from the attic, strings fraying into screams. I shoved the dresser tighter against the hatch, nailed boards across it, but the sound only grew louder, vibrating through the ceiling until dust rained down in steady streams. I screamed for it to stop, begged, prayed, but the music only changed into a rhythm that matched my heartbeat, quickening each time I grew afraid. By the 62nd night, I began to see them, the other caretakers. They appeared in the hallways at the edge of light, their faces pale, eyes hollow. Some wore uniforms older than mine, names stitched in thread faded with years. They didn't speak. They only watched, waiting. When I blinked, they vanished, but the carpet stayed damp where they had stood, footprints trailing away toward rooms that no longer opened. I stopped eating. The food tasted of ash, each bite turning rancid in my mouth. I stopped drinking too, though my throat cracked and bled from thirst. The voices told me to keep away from both, and I obeyed, afraid the lodge had already poisoned everything. My body weakened, my steps unsteady, but some part of me knew the less I consumed, the longer I might resist becoming part of this place. On the 65th night, the knocking returned, not at the front door, but at every door. A chorus of raps, polite and steady, echoing through the hallways, all in rhythm. I covered my ears, curled by the fire, but the sound burrowed into my bones. When it stopped, the silence was worse. I checked the doors the next morning. Every one stood open, though I knew I had locked them. Inside, each bed bore the imprint of bodies that weren't there, sheets pressed down, pillows indented with heads invisible. The lake grew louder too, even from inside. I heard the ice groaning, cracking, voices beneath shrieking like wails in distress. I woke one morning with frost crusted across my lips, lungs aching with cold. My notebook had slid from my lap during the night, opened on the floor. The words sprawled across the page were written in the same jagged hand I had seen before. Y-O-B-L-L-E-Y. By the 70th night, I began to believe it. I moved like a man underwater, sluggish, my limbs heavy, the air thick around me. Each step echoed like I was walking through liquid. My reflection confirmed it. When I dared to glance into the bathroom mirror, water streamed down my face though I was dry. My eyes blurred as though submerged. I smashed the mirror again, but when I returned later, it was whole once more, reflection waiting patiently. That was when the faces came inside. I saw them first in the corners, pale and stretched, pressing against the wallpaper like figures behind thin ice. Their mouths moved soundlessly, then split wide in screams I could not hear. When I blinked, they were gone, but the spirals on the walls had grown sharper, darker, etched into the wood beneath the paper. The 72nd night nearly broke me. The fire refused to light no matter how much wood I piled. My matches struck flame that died instantly, smothered by air too heavy to breathe. I sat in darkness, my only light the weak glow of the elevator panel as it hummed open again. The infinity symbol blinked steadily, patient. I clutched the notebook to my chest and whispered to myself until morning, though I don't remember what I said. Carver hadn't returned in weeks. The world beyond the storm might not even exist anymore. I began to wonder if he had ever returned, or if my memories of him at all were part of the lodge's trick. Maybe I had been alone here the entire time, hearing only the lodge itself, wearing its mask of Carver's voice when it needed me to stay. By the 75th night, I could no longer deny it. I was unraveling. My notebook pages filled themselves faster than I could tear them out. I would close it, set it aside, and minutes later find it open again, words fresh and bleeding through the paper. Wayubalanji, Jonus, Thlokitanj. The handwriting shifted between mine and others, as if all the caretakers before me were adding their voices to its demand. I tried to burn the notebook in desperation. I threw it into the fireplace, piled logs high, struck matches until finally the flames caught. For a moment, the pages curled and blackened, smoke rising. Then the fire sputtered, died, and when the smoke cleared, the notebook sat whole again on the hearth, unmarked, waiting for me to pick it up. I screamed and hurled it across the room, but when I looked down a moment later, it was already back in my hands. The violin above me reached a frenzy that night, bowing faster than human arms should allow, strings snapping and reforming in endless shrieks. My body trembled with each note, my teeth rattling, ears bleeding from the pitch. The hatch upstairs rattled against the boards I'd nailed down, rising and falling with something pounding beneath. I pressed my back against the wall, tears streaming, begging for silence. The music only grew louder, until I could hear my own heartbeat threaded through its rhythm. And then, for the first time, the voices fell quiet. In that silence, I understood what they had been warning me of all along. It wasn't the faces in the ice or the figures in the halls. It wasn't the elevator or the reflections or even the music. It was what came when all of those fell still, when the lodge itself grew silent, waiting. I realized then that the silence meant something was finally coming. The silence was worse than any sound. The lodge breathed with its own rhythm, a constant backdrop of creaks, groans, and whispers that had filled every night. But when all of that drained away, I felt exposed, as if the very air was leaning in to listen. I sat in the lobby chair, fire long gone to ash, notebook heavy on my lap, and realized that for the first time in 76 nights, the building wanted me still. I didn't move. I barely breathed. The clock on the wall remained frozen at midnight, its hands refusing to tick, yet my wristwatch told me it was well past 3. The silence spread wider, seeping into my chest, flattening my heartbeat, until I thought it might stop. That was when I heard the floorboards sigh in the hallway. The sound of weight pressing down, deliberate and slow. I gripped the flashlight, though I knew it was useless. The beam shook in my hand, cutting a tunnel through the dark, and there in the hall stood my other self. He was clearer now, not a reflection, not a shadow. He was me, exactly me, but his body seemed stretched thin, as if made from smoke-given flesh. His eyes glowed faintly, black pools rimmed in pale light, and his mouth curled into a smile that didn't belong to me. He stepped forward, and the air grew heavier. My chest caved with each breath. He didn't speak with words, but I heard his voice inside my head, layered with a dozen others. It's time. I backed into the lobby, heart racing, though there was nowhere to run. Every door I had locked stood wide, hallways lengthened into black corridors that didn't end. My double kept coming, slow, deliberate, certain. Behind him, shapes moved, figures of the caretakers before me, their faces pale, eyes hollow, their mouths stretched into open silence. They trailed him like a court of shadows, filling the hall, spreading toward me. I raised the flashlight higher, but its beam sputtered and died, swallowed whole. In the darkness, I could still see them, clearer than light allowed. My other self reached the edge of the lobby and stopped. The figures fanned out, encircling me, pressing close without touching. The silence deepened until my own pulse was the only sound, thudding in my ears like a drum. Then the elevator chimed. Its doors slid open with a hiss, and the panel glowed steady with that impossible symbol. The air rushed inward, pulling at my clothes, dragging me toward it. My double gestured, hand outstretched, inviting me to step inside. The caretakers closed in, not forcing me but guiding, their presence heavy as stone. I staggered back, shaking my head. No, I whispered, though the word barely left my lips. The silence devoured it whole. My double tilted his head, smile widening, and his voice thundered through me though the air remained stipple. You're already here. I don't know what broke in me then. Maybe fear, maybe sanity. I bolted for the front door, boots slamming across the wood, hands fumbling at locks I had undone 100 times. The door burst open, and the storm crashed over me. Snow whipped across my face, wind clawing at my skin, but I ran. I plunged knee deep into drifts, lungs burning, the lodge's glow shrinking behind me. I thought I had escaped. For the first time in weeks, I felt the raw bite of the storm, the sting of cold air filling my chest. But as I stumbled toward the lake, the snow thinned, the wind dulled, and silence pressed close again. The faces in the ice waited, dozens, maybe hundreds, all straining upward, their eyes locked on me, their mouths opened, and this time sound erupted, not whispers, not screams, but my own name, shouted in unison. Adrian. The ice cracked beneath my boots. Lines split outward like veins, water surging dark below. I scrambled back, but the fractures chased me, stretching to the shore. My reflection split across the shards, each piece of me smiling differently, some laughing, some screaming. I fell to my knees in the snow, clutching my head as the sound of my name rose higher, echoing across the lake until the storm itself seemed to carry it. When I looked up, the lodge loomed behind me. No matter how far I had run, it stood only steps away, lights glowing warmly in its windows as if nothing had changed. My footprints didn't lead away from it. They circled back, endless loops in the snow, as though I had never moved. I stumbled inside again, door closing gently at my back. The silence settled over me like a blanket. My double stood waiting by the elevator, the caretakers filling the lobby, their eyes reflecting the faint glow of the panel. I knew then that resistance was gone. The lodge hadn't trapped me. It had been reshaping me all along, leading me here, step by step. My notebook slipped from my hand. It fell open on the rug, pages fluttering, fresh ink bleeding across them. Words scrawled themselves as I watched. NAGHTC into us Sivin, 8 hours. The elevator hummed softly patient, its doors yawning wide. My double turned and stepped inside. The caretakers followed, one by one, their bodies dissolving into the light until only I remained. I stood frozen, every muscle trembling. But the silence pressed harder, heavier, until the choice wasn't mine anymore. My legs moved forward. The rug slipped beneath my boots. The light grew brighter, filling my vision. And the last thing I saw before the doors closed was the lobby fading, walls stretching long into dark corridors without end. And then there was nothing. No storm, no lodge, no lake. Only silence, deep and endless, curling into itself like the spiral on the walls. I don't know how long I've been here. Time doesn't exist in this place. There are no days, no nights, only the hum of the elevator, carrying me somewhere without floors. I write because the notebook is still with me, always open, always waiting for words to fill it. I see my handwriting form, but I don't feel the pen move. The ink is endless, black as the lake, scrawling even when I try to stop. The last entry is already written, though I don't remember setting it down. It reads, I to KAIGHT SEFJO BT remoti lodigi IN Canada AGIG HTRA MMS ADRIN MAR ER below it, in smaller letters bleeding across the page. Nabo des you or Toran. My name is Elias Mercer, and I am 34 years old. I accepted the post of a seasonal fire lookout in the Bitterroot Range of western Montana, because solitude has always carried more comfort to me than crowds ever could. I hold a degree in forestry, and for the last decade I have worked as a ranger and trail steward in different corners of the Rockies. When the opportunity arose to spend an entire summer and fall stationed in a tower built on a lonely peak, I did not hesitate. I introduced myself formally to the regional supervisor, signed the necessary forms, and was handed the key to my own kingdom of silence. The tower is known locally as Granite Peak Lookout, though the granite here is scarred and wind-and burned, bleached almost white by years of weather. From its deck you can see ridges stack into one another, like waves frozen in motion, forests blackening into blue with distance, and at night, stars spilling without end. It is a post meant for vigilance, for careful watching, but I have come to understand it is also a place where the night itself performs. I hiked in with my gear in late June, carrying dry rations, notebooks, and more books than I had space for. The supply mule train would only come once a month, so I was expected to rely on my own inventory until then. The tower rose like a square skeleton out of the trees, a spindly structure that looked fragile against the vast horizon, but had stood for 70 years through storms and fire alike. I remember unlocking the narrow trapdoor, stepping into the cabin and smelling the preserved must of timber soaked in sunlight and dust. Everything was orderly: maps pinned on the walls, the Osborne fire finder in the center, a cot folded against the wall, a radio humming faint static in the corner. That first night, I lay awake, listening to the timber creak around me as if testing my resolve. The wind played tricks in the rafters, whistling through cracks, and I told myself it was nothing more than that. My mind was still in the city then, fragile with its own noise. The job began easily. Each morning I woke with the dawn, brewed black coffee, and surveyed the ridgelines with binoculars for smoke. Hours passed in silence, except for the chatter of ravens or the rustle of deer moving in the brush below. I sent in weather readings, sketched cloud shapes in my log, and read novels until my eyes blurred. The air was thin, sharp with pine, and the tower's height gave a sense of command, of distance from everything human. I thought it would be perfect. By the third week, I began to notice the quiet was not empty. It was layered, like fabric, with seams that sometimes split to reveal something else. The first sign came one night when I rose to relieve myself. I stepped out onto the deck in bare feet and felt the boards chilled by dew. The valley below was shadowed, pine tops black spires. Then a sound reached me: voices. Not one, not two, but a whole crowd, murmuring as though at a gathering. The voices rose from the forest basin, faint but distinct, carrying cadences like conversation. I gripped the railing, straining to listen, but no words resolved. The sound moved slowly upslope, rippling through the trees, and then stopped all at once. Silence pressed harder than before. I waited for the wind to explain it, but the branches stood perfectly still. When I reported the incident to myself in the log the next morning, I wrote only, heard voices, likely wind. I underlined it twice. By July the days stretched hot and long. Heat shimmered off, granite storms blossomed and withered on the horizon, and my skin darkened to leather. But each night carried a peculiarity. Sometimes it was footsteps circling the base of the tower, crunching deliberately on the gravel I had not laid. Sometimes it was light, tiny points, like lanterns, gliding through the forest in formations too regular to be fireflies. I began to leave the lantern burning low, on the desk through the night, though it attracted moths that slapped against the glass in frantic waves. My radio chatter with other lookouts did not help. A man stationed 60 miles east mentioned, half joking, "You'll see things up there. Nights get long." I laughed back, but did not explain what I had already seen. Midway through July, a storm rolled in late. The air pressed thick, charged, and the horizon stitched with veins of lightning. I sat at my post, marking each strike, when the radio crackled. It wasn't dispatch. It wasn't another lookout. It was my own voice, clipped and delayed, speaking the very words I had just said into my weather log. "Southwest strike, ridge 3 miles. Then silence. My pen stopped. I called back into the radio, demanded if anyone had patched my line, but static hissed only. My heart beat too fast, and I tasted iron. I did not sleep that night. Instead, I wrote in my logbook until dawn, as if my handwriting could anchor me to myself. The pattern of nights shifted after that. The strangeness became bolder. I found handprints on the outside of the glass one morning, streaked with condensation from within. They were smaller than mine, narrow palms with long fingers, as though a child had pressed against the pane while I slept. I checked the ladder, the trapdoor, the locks. Everything was secure, and yet the prints remained until the sun burned them away. Another evening, I set a mug of water on the sill. Hours later, when I reached for it, the water was gone. The mug dry as if it had not held liquid in days. I accused myself of misremembering, of being too isolated, too imaginative. But the entries in my notebook grew longer, more frantic, each sentence a question. I began to dream differently. Dreams where I was not myself, where I looked out from behind the glass of the tower, but saw the deck empty, my cot vacant. Dreams where the forest swayed in one motion, every tree bending as though inhaling at once, and I felt myself bend with it. The dreams left residue. I would wake to the smell of smoke, though no fire burned, or to the scrape of fingernails on the wood below. Some mornings I thought I could hear the echo of my own name, threaded through the whisper of the wind, too exact to dismiss. One night toward the end of July, I climbed down the tower to stretch my legs. The moon was high, silvering the pines. I walked a short loop around the clearing, checked the fuel shed, the water barrel. As I turned back toward the tower, I froze. There was someone on the deck. A dark figure stood outlined against the lantern glow inside, motionless, hands resting on the rail, my breath locked. I counted the rungs as I climbed, each one trembling. When I reached the deck, the figure was gone. The lantern still burned. The trapdoor was bolted from the inside. I entered, shut everything, and sat awake until sunrise. I did not write that encounter in the official log. I wrote it only here, privately, to acknowledge it happened. August crept in, and with it, a sense of dread I could not shrug. Each night had its own theater, its own display. Some were subtle, whispers, the brush of shadow. Others were direct. One night the door rattled violently, hinges shrieking, though the air outside was calm. Another, the radio spat out static shaped into words. "We'll see you." I abandoned my cot for the chair beside the fire finder, sleeping upright with an axe propped near. My reflection in the glass began to look unfamiliar, thinner eyes ringed with shadow. Sometimes the reflection lingered a second longer after I turned away, as though reluctant to give me back control. Still I remained. A lookout is sworn to his post, sworn to watch for fire. The forest depended on me, or so I believed. Yet the nights began to feel less like shifts, to endure and more like tests, as if something in the mountain gouged whether I was worthy to watch at all. I tried to reason the wind. Fatigue, the mind under strain. But reason frayed when I realized the murmuring crowd in the valleys had begun to chant in rhythm with my heartbeat. I write this account with a full recognition of how it may read. Paranoia, exhaustion, imagination. Yet the experiences are as tangible to me as the rough boards beneath my palms. I am Elias Mercer, fire lookout of Granite Peak, Montana. My duty is to watch. But what I watch is no longer limited to smoke and flame. The nights are strange here, and they have only begun to show their teeth. By the first week of August, I found myself counting the hours until sundown with dread. The daylight was still mine, filled with the order of measurements, compass bearings, and smoke reports. But night had become a country I entered unwillingly, a place governed by rules I hadn't been given. Even before the sun touched the horizon, the forest would begin to change character. The stillness wasn't natural, it was curated. Birds stopped mid-call, leaving unfinished notes hanging in the air like dropped threads. Chipmunks froze mid-scurry. It was as if every creature that lived here received the same order to hold its breath. That left me alone with the waiting. On one of those nights, lightning spidered across the western sky without thunder. I sat on the deck, my eyes fixed on the ridges where the strikes split rock in silence, and I caught a movement far below. A single light flickered, weaving between tree trunks, not fire, not headlamp, but something slower, steady, as though carried at shoulder height. It did not waver with wind or terrain. I tracked it as it drifted closer to the base of my tower. I leaned over the railing, waiting to hear crunching gravel or the scrape of boots. But when the light reached the clearing, it blinked out. I descended halfway down the ladder, lantern in hand, heart punching against ribs. Nothing. No tracks, no scent of smoke. Only the echo of my own breathing. When I climbed back into the tower, The lantern's glow behind me revealed a smear on the glass that hadn't been there. A shape traced by fingertip, a circle crossed with a line like an eye half shut. I wiped it away with my sleeve, but the oil smeared deeper, staining the view. The radio had become no better company. For weeks it had offered brief conversations with other lookouts, mundane exchanges about storm cells and temperature swings. But by August the voices grew faint, sometimes warped, sometimes overlaid with static that formed patterns too deliberate to be chance. One evening, while logging cloud cover, I heard another operator call my name. Not my call sign, not my tower, but my full name, Elias Mercer, spoken in a tone neither urgent nor casual, just level. I pressed the transmit button, asked who was speaking, but the only reply was my own question repeated back after a pause. Then the frequency dropped to silence. I couldn't bring myself to turn the radio off. If it called again, I told myself I had to hear it. It was during one of those nights, when the pressure of the dark was so heavy I could feel it against my teeth, that I tried something desperate. I propped open the logbook on the desk and wrote, "If you are here, tell me what you want." The pencil left grooves where my hand shook. I turned away, paced the narrow cabin. When I returned, another line had been written beneath mine in my own slanted script, to be seen. I slammed the book shut, checked the trapdoor, the windows, the ladder, as though some intruder might be crouched in the corners of the cabin. There was no one. The book sat innocently on the desk, closed, humming with its own weight. I shoved it under the cot and didn't retrieve it until morning, when daylight made me doubt my own sanity. The new line was still there. I stopped sleeping properly after that. My body existed in 2-hour increments, napping upright with the axe across my lap, jerking awake to the scrape of a branch or the patter of unseen steps circling below. Fatigue gnawed at me, made the shadows swell larger, made the whispers harder to ignore. And yet, some nights carried a clarity so sharp it terrified me more than dreams. One such night, I stood on the deck and stared down the moonlit slope, and every tree trunk aligned like ribs, every branch seemed poised, waiting. I felt the gaze of the forest press up against the tower walls. The air shivered with presence. I knew then that watching was no longer my job alone. Something was watching back, intently, as though measuring my endurance. Days didn't rescue me anymore. I'd catch sight of movement where there should be none, a flicker of pale skin darting between shadows at noon, a figure crouched on the far ridge vanishing when I raised binoculars. Once, while checking the weather instruments below the tower, I felt breath brush the back of my neck. I spun with the axe raised, but nothing waited behind me except the empty air and the dizzying drop. When I climbed back up, the trapdoor slammed itself shut above me, though the hinge had never once caught in the wind before. I sat on the steps for an hour, clutching the axe, refusing to believe what I already knew. August's midpoint brought the first fire I had to report. Smoke rose from a canyon 5 miles north, a thin column curling like a beckoning finger. My duty was clear. Measure the bearing, call it in, track its spread. But when I sighted through the fire finder, my skin went cold. The smoke column didn't waver or spread like normal fire. It coiled upward in perfect spirals, steady as a drill, and at its base the forest looked untouched. No glow, no char. I reported coordinates anyway. Dispatch confirmed they'd send a patrol. The next day, they radioed back nothing found, no burned scar, no evidence. They asked if I'd been reading marriages. I said nothing. But in my logbook that night, the response appeared beneath my last line in the same hand as before. Now you see us. Every evening felt like a test of willpower after that. Sometimes the visitors, if that's what they were, would keep to the periphery, shadows pacing at the edge of my lantern's reach. Other times they pressed closer, I woke once to the cot sagging, as though another body lay down beside me, though the room remained empty. Another time, the deck creaked with the measured rhythm of footsteps, circling until dawn, my mind frayed with questions I didn't want answered. Were these human? Spirits? Something older? Or worse, something that had no concept of humanity at all, only of curiosity? The moment I realized the mountain had no intention of letting me leave came late in August. Supplies were due, the mule train scheduled for the third morning. I rose with the sun, prepared the rope haul, stacked empty crates on the deck. Noon came, then dusk, then midnight, but no supplies arrived. The trail should have echoed with hooves, the air with the jangle of bells. Nothing. I radioed dispatch, but the line hissed empty, not even static this time. The next morning I hiked a half-mile down the trail, expecting to meet them, but the path ended abruptly at a wall of pines, trunks jammed tight as if they'd grown overnight to bar the way. I hacked at them with the axe until my arms shook, but each cut released no sap, no scent of pine, only dust like ash. I turned back, throat dry, realizing the tower had become not just my post but my prison. When I returned to the cabin, another message awaited in the logbook. Stay, the nights are not finished. That night, I sat awake with every lantern burning, casting the cabin in harsh overlapping shadows. My reflection multiplied in the glass until it looked like I was crowded by a dozen versions of myself, each tilting its head at a different angle. They began to move with slight delay, just fractions of a second, enough to notice. When I raised my hand, one reflection hesitated before following. Its mouth twitched, almost smiling. I doused the lanterns in panic, preferring the dark to the false company of myself. The next morning, the forest looked unchanged. Sunlight draped in clean gold. Deer prints scattered across the clearing, blue jays shrieking from the canopy. But I knew better. Whatever governed the nights here was bleeding into the daylight, colonizing it, weaving into each hour. My duty as a fire lookout was simple watch, record, report. But none of my training had prepared me for being watched back, for my own logbook to betray me, for the forest itself to shift into a stage where I was the only audience, and perhaps the only actor left. I haven't seen another human face since July, and yet, every night, I feel surrounded. September arrived without ceremony, though I marked the days in my log as if keeping them accounted for would anchor me. The nights grew colder, the air sharp with the edge of early frost, but that did nothing to quiet what circled me. If anything, the chill seemed to embolden them. I would lie on the cot and hear it, a hand trailing across the outer walls, deliberate, slow, as though mapping every board. Some nights the sound was followed by tapping against the glass, not frantic, not random, but steady as code. When I rose and scanned with my lantern, there was only my own reflection staring back. Sometimes it blinked when I didn't. I still tried to do the job. Habit gave me structure. Every morning I scanned the ridgelines for smoke, though my eyes now played tricks with distance. Shadows rising from valleys bent in shapes too regular, too humanoid, then dissolved the moment I adjusted focus. When clouds built on the horizon, I plotted them, though the barometer spun wild as though drunk. I spoke into the radio, reciting weather patterns and coordinates, even when I knew no one was listening. It became more like prayer than communication. I realized I was reporting to the mountain itself, like a child offering proof of loyalty to an unseen parent. One afternoon, as the sun tilted west and lit the tower in copper light, I dozed at the desk. I woke with a start, and the logbook was open before me, though I hadn't touched it. A new entry had been written in neat, deliberate lines. Do you know why you were chosen? My throat closed. I gripped the pencil and scrawled beneath, to watch for fire. When I blinked, Another response appeared, words forming one by one as if the page itself exhaled them to watch for us. My pulse roared in my ears. I slammed the book shut and shoved it under a pile of maps, but I knew the words would remain, waiting like a coiled snake under paper. After that, the tower no longer felt like mine. I moved through it as though trespassing in a stranger's home. Every object had been subtly rearranged. The chair angled differently. The cot pulled half an inch from the wall. The lantern wick shortened. Once I found my axe leaning against the door, instead of by the bed where I always left it. The message was clear. I was being studied in return. My patterns cataloged the way I had once cataloged storms. The idea chilled me more than any whisper outside. Fire could be fought, storms could be tracked, but how do you defend against an intelligence that lives in the silence itself? By mid-September, I gave up sleeping altogether. I paced the deck at night, eyes on the valley, waiting for whatever approached. Sometimes the lights came again, lantern, like globes threading through the trees, weaving closer in geometric patterns. Once they circled the tower, rising up to the height of my windows, pulsing in time with my heartbeat until I nearly fainted. Other nights the voices returned, not murmuring anymore but chanting, rising and falling like waves. The language was unknown but the rhythm undeniable. I clapped my hands over my ears, but the words crawled through bone instead of air. I wanted to scream back, to beg for silence, but fear of being acknowledged kept me mute. Then came the night of the knock. It was late, frost silvering the deck, the forest hushed into stone. A single knock echoed at the trapdoor beneath my feet. Not the rattle of wind, not the scrape of wood, but the firm knock of knuckles. 3 times. I froze in my chair, staring at the hatch. The knock repeated. My skin prickled, every hair lifting. I forced myself to whisper, "Who's there?" My own voice answered back from below, same cadence, same weakness. "Who's there?" I sat rooted, heart hammering, until dawn smeared light across the horizon. When I dared to look, the trapdoor bore fresh scratches, concentric arcs like nails dragged outward. I thought of leaving then, abandoning my post, hiking down no matter what path the forest had sealed. But each time I gathered my pack, I would glance out the window and see movement blocking the trail. Figures standing among the trees, indistinct but upright, patient. They never moved toward me, never away. Just held the line as if waiting for me to attempt escape. My gut told me plainly I would not be permitted. And some traitor inside me admitted I wasn't sure I wanted to leave anymore. Curiosity had rooted itself deep. I had begun to wonder what would happen if I stayed long enough, if I allowed the nights to finish their lesson. The turning point came on the autumn equinox. The day felt heavy, light slanting differently, the air hungrier. I logged the date as usual, but my hand cramped so hard the numbers warped. At sunset, the forest erupted with sound unlike anything before. Every branch groaned, every trunk shuddered, and a chorus of voices rose not from below, but from within the tower itself. I staggered back, clutching my ears, but the sound pressed through flesh. My lanterns guttered out though no wind touched them. In the dark, the glass walls of the cabin filled with faces. Hundreds, maybe thousands. Pale outlines pressed nose to nose against the windows, staring in. They were featureless yet distinct, shapes of people who had no right to be here. My reflection dissolved among them, one of many. I tried to scream, but my throat locked, and the only sound that emerged was a whisper, not my own, say, "You see us." The vision lasted seconds or hours. I couldn't tell. When the lantern sputtered back, the faces were gone, but the glass bore smears of condensation in the shape of countless palms. The air smelled of wet earth and iron. I collapsed on the floor, body racked with tremors, tears cutting through the grime on my face. I don't know how long I lay there, only that when I rose, Dawn was already burning pale on the horizon. My logbook sat open, a single line written across the fresh page, almost finished. After that night, the tower became a liminal place. Time slipped loose. Some days I woke to find the sun setting when I had just watched it rise. Meals went uneaten, hours vanished without memory. I caught myself speaking aloud to no one, reciting reports into dead air, or worse, laughing at things I couldn't recall. I worried I was losing myself, becoming only another reflection pressed against the glass. Yet even in that erosion, a terrible clarity grew. The nights weren't random torments. They were building to something, a culmination, and I had been chosen not to resist but to witness. September bled into October, and the aspens below turned gold. I watched leaves fall in spirals that echoed the smoke I'd once reported. The forest seemed alive in new ways, shifting like a body breathing, every ridge a rib, every valley a vein. When the wind blew, it carried voices that almost shaped my name, and I began to understand the mountain didn't want me to fight or flee. It wanted me to see, to learn its pattern, to add my gaze to its own. The fire finder in the center of the cabin no longer felt like a tool for spotting smoke, but an altar, a lens through which something greater peered back. Still, fear never left me. Each night was a coin toss between awe and terror. Sometimes the lights came soft, drifting like curious spirits. Other times the pounding at the trapdoor returned, or the chanting filled my skull until I wept. But the line in my logbook haunted me most. Almost finished. What did that mean? Finished with me. With the lesson. With the boundary between their world and mine. I wait now for the nights to reveal the end of their design. I record every detail, though my words feel insufficient, too human. The logbook is half mine, half theirs, each page stitched together like two voices forced into duet. And with each entry, the handwriting grows harder to distinguish from my own. I fear the finish line is near, and I fear it may not leave me human at all. October hardened the nights into something merciless. The cold arrived sharp and early, seeping through cracks in the tower walls, no matter how I stuffed them with rags. Frost rimed the windows, blurring the tree line below, and yet I would wake to find clear prints in the condensation palms, fingertips, sometimes the shape of a face pressed against the glass from the outside. My breath fogged only a fraction of the pain, but the rest of the glass swirled with smudges, as if dozens had gathered in the hours I slept. I started to leave the lantern burning bright, hoping light might repel them. It didn't. If anything, the glow seemed to draw them closer, their shapes thickening in the reflection, until I could swear I saw shoulders, rib cages, jaws straining at the edge of visibility. The logbook became less mine each day. Where once my handwriting dominated, now entire passages appeared without my touch. Looping script too perfect to be human. We watch through you. Your eyes are ours. Stay until the night finishes breathing. The words unnerved me, but worse was their accuracy. They described details I had not spoken aloud. The way my hand trembled holding the pencil, the number of steps I took circling the deck, the rhythm of my heartbeat when I pressed my palm to the glass. It was not just observation. It was possession. Sleep offered no refuge. Dreams blurred into waking so seamlessly that I stopped marking the difference. I would stand at the fire finder, sighting a distant ridge, only to realize hours later that the ridge had been a face leaning closer through the window, its eyes two black valleys, its mouth yawning like a canyon. Sometimes I would dream of fire, towers of smoke spiraling, flames racing down ridgelines, but when I opened my eyes, I still smelled the burn, still felt heat against my cheeks, though no fire scarred the forest below. I began to wonder if I was being shown futures or fictions designed to keep me pliant. Then came the first night the tower itself breathed. It started subtle, the boards beneath my feet rising, and falling in rhythm, the walls creaking not with wind, but with a slow inhale and exhale. I pressed my ear to the floorboards and heard it clearly, the hollow rush of lungs pulling air. My chest tightened, my own breath sensing against my will, until I felt myself suffocating when the tower paused. I staggered to the deck, gasping, but the rhythm carried through the wood into the railing, into the ladder, into the very mountain below. For one terrifying hour, I was trapped in the lungs of something vast and unseen, forced to breathe on its command. When at last it released me, my throat was raw, and my chest ached as though I had coughed smoke for days. I thought of writing an official report, forcing myself to sound rational, to frame this madness as atmospheric anomaly. But every time I tried, the words bent beneath my hand, shifting mid-sentence into their own messages. Almost finished. Almost finished. That phrase repeated on page after page until I tore sheets from the log and burned them in the lantern flame. The smoke carried a stench not of paper but of flesh. I nearly vomited, yet even as the ashes fell, the logbook replaced the pages, whole again the next morning. The supply train never came. I stopped expecting it. My rations dwindled, cans rattling light as I stacked them back on the shelf. Hunger gnawed, but even when I forced beans into my mouth, the food tasted wrong, like soil, like rot. Some nights, though, I felt full despite not eating, as if the act of enduring the tower's breath fed me in ways I couldn't understand. My body thinned, my reflection sharpening in the glass until my cheekbones looked like the ridges below, and my eyes sank hollow as valleys. Yet my strength held. That was the most frightening part. I was wasting and thriving all at once. By mid-October, the forest stopped pretending to be ordinary. I looked out one morning, and the tree line had rearranged itself into a spiral, trunks bending inward to form a vast pattern like the whorl of an eye staring up at the tower. The next morning, the spiral had vanished, replaced by perfect rows as though planted by hand. I would blink, and the pattern shifted again, the whole forest reconfiguring with each glance. I stopped trusting my eyes, but the logbook confirmed what I saw, sketching diagrams in precise ink. This is the order. This is the shape you must learn. The voices grew clearer, too. Where once they had murmured, now they called me by name, each syllable stretched, echoing, Elias drawn long like a thread pulled taut. Sometimes they came from the valley, sometimes from the deck itself, whispering through the slats as though lips brushed the wood. One night, they coaxed me so insistently that I descended the ladder halfway, lantern in hand, just to prove I wasn't their puppet. At the base of the tower, the voices hushed. The clearing was silver with frost. I swung the lantern in wide arcs, my breath steaming. That was when I saw them. Not faces, not shadows, forms. Tall, spindly figures with limbs too long. Their bodies bending like trees caught in wind that didn't exist. Their skin glowed faintly, as though lit from within by embers, and where faces should have been, only smooth planes curved outward. They stood in a wide ring around the clearing, utterly still, their heads all tilted toward me. My lantern shook in my grip. I wanted to run back up, but my body rooted to the ground. Then one lifted an arm, a gesture not hostile but beckoning. My legs buckled, ready to obey. Somehow I broke free, scrambling back up the ladder on hands and knees. When I slammed the trapdoor shut, it shook against the pressure of dozens of palms pressing from below. I wept then, alone in the cabin, shaking with exhaustion. I wept because part of me wanted to go back down, to see what waited if I stepped willingly into their ring. I wept because I no longer knew if I was resisting or simply delaying. Later that same night, I heard the radio stir. Static resolved into words, clear and human. Mercer. This is dispatch. Do you copy? My throat closed with desperate relief. I lunged for the mic, shouted into it, begged them not to leave me alone. Their voice returned calm, Steady, hold fast, Mercer. Almost finished. My blood iced. I dropped the mic, staring at it as though it had sprouted teeth. The radio fell silent again, and I realized too late, even the voices I trusted were theirs now. October waned, and each sunset felt like the drawing of a curtain. The nights lengthened, and the tower pulsed like a heart. My body adapted to the rhythm, my hunger replaced by a gnawing need to watch, to stay awake, to witness. My fear had not lessened, but it had been absorbed into something else, inevitability. The logbook no longer argued with me, it instructed. Stay awake, mark the pattern. The finish comes with the last leapel, and I obeyed because what else was left? Now I sit at the desk, lantern light dim, frost creeping up the panes. Outside, the last aspen leaves twist loose, spiraling down into the forest's waiting mouth. Each one feels like a countdown. I don't know what waits when the last leaf falls, but I can feel it pressing close, coiled behind the glass, behind my own reflection, waiting for permission. I suspect I have already given it. By the time November touched the peaks with snow, the line between me and the tower had nearly dissolved. I no longer thought of it as a structure of beams and nails. It had become bone and sinew, ribs arching over me, lungs drawing my breath, eyes opening wherever glass reflected. I stopped calling it the lookout. In my logbook, I began calling it we. The last leaves fell in the first week. I watched the final aspen spiral down in the twilight, gold turned to dull brown against frost. The moment it struck earth, the forest exhaled. I heard it in every direction. A long sigh that bent the branches, rattled ice loose from needles, and shook snow down in a flurry that glittered like ash. The sound carried through the tower beams, through my ribs, until I was sure the breath was mine. In its wake came silence, but not the natural kind. This silence pressed so hard it buzzed against my teeth, and within it I could hear my own blood pounding like a drum. I thought, this is it. This is the finish. But the night stretched long, empty, unbroken, as if the forest were waiting for me to move first. The next day, the horizon burned. At first I thought it was sunrise, but the light came from the north, not the east. I swung the firefinder toward it, expecting smoke, but what I saw froze me. A line of flame advanced across a ridge, orange tongues licking skyward, but the fire wasn't consuming anything. The trees remained whole, their branches unburned even as the blaze devoured them. The fire marched forward without fuel, a wall of pure heat. I radioed a report out of habit, my voice hoarse, but no reply came. The logbook, however, had already written the entry for me. The fire is us opening our eyes. I knew then there would be no rescue. No patrol, no mule train, no dispatch voice breaking through static. The world beyond the tower had receded, leaving only this mountain, this forest, and the thing that lived inside it. I tried to imagine running, forcing myself down the trail despite the watchers, pushing until I collapsed. But each time I pictured it, I saw myself turning back, feet carrying me home to the tower without hesitation. The thought brought me no comfort. That night, the faces returned to the glass, not pressed against it this time, standing behind my reflection. Dozens, then hundreds. Pale shapes layered over my own image, until I couldn't tell where my body ended and theirs began. I lifted my hand, and the glass filled with other hands rising in unison, a field of limbs moving with mine. For a moment, I felt unity. A terrible, beautiful unity. And then one face lingered longer than the rest, not fading with the others. Its features sharpened, eyes hollow and deep, mouth wide, jaw unhinged. It leaned forward against the glass until I thought it might slip through. I stumbled back, knocking over the lantern. Flame guttered across the desk, and for one insane instant I considered letting it burn, letting the tower catch so the forest would take me in fire rather than shadows. But the flame sputtered out as though smothered by unseen lips. Smoke rose, and the logbook fluttered open, words appearing in the margin, "Not yet." I began speaking to them aloud then. It felt inevitable. I would pace the deck at night and whisper questions into the dark. Sometimes the forest answered in sighs, in creaks, in voices that used my tone. Sometimes the logbook replied. Other times, silence hung heavy, punishing. The more I spoke, the less I recognized my own voice. My words stretched, bent, took on cadences not mine. Almost finished. I found myself muttering without realizing. I scrawled it across scraps of paper, the phrase looping until the letters no longer resembled language. Hunger had left me completely. I could go days without touching the canned food, and still I felt sustained, though my body was gaunt, bones jutting beneath skin. My eyes ached constantly, but when I closed them, light spilled across the dark like veins of fire. I started seeing from angles the windows didn't allow, catching glimpses of the forest floor beneath me, or the far ridge, or the hollow of the valley. At first it disoriented me, left me dizzy, but soon it became natural. The mountain was teaching me to see as it did all at once, from every side. The tower itself shifted too. Boards no longer aligned the same way each morning. The ladder tilted, as if the bones of the structure grew overnight. The cabin felt larger inside than out, the walls stretching, corners leaning farther away when I reached for them. Some nights I walked circles around the room, until I couldn't find the cot, though it had been only a step behind me. Other times the trapdoor opened onto nothing, no ladder, no clearing, only endless black dropping away. I slammed it shut, chest pounding, certain that if I lingered too long I would step willingly into that dark and never return. Then came the night the radio spoke again. I had stopped touching it, afraid of what voice might echo, but the static roared to life unbidden, louder than before, and through it came a woman's tone, warm, measured. "Mercer. Elias Mercer. You've done well." My hands shook, hovering above the mic. The voice continued. "You were chosen to watch. You've watched. And now, we ask you to open." I croaked into the receiver. "Open what?" The reply came without pause. "Yourself." The radio went dead. I sat for hours, staring at the black box, terrified of what it meant and more terrified of how part of me understood exactly. By late November, snow buried the clearing, yet I felt no cold. I would step onto the deck barefoot, frost cracking beneath my skin, and feel only warmth radiating from within the mountain. The watchers stood among the trees in greater numbers, their forms clearer now, towering, thin, faces still blank but posture unmistakably expectant. They no longer vanished when I looked. They stood openly, patiently, waiting for the finish. I tried shouting at them once, voice breaking against the silent air. "What do you want from me?" The answer came not from them, but from every surface of the tower vibrating at once. "To see through you." The logbook grew full. Its pages stretched endless, new sheets appearing each morning, already half filled. My handwriting and theirs blended, until I could no longer tell where my thoughts ended and theirs began. I stopped resisting, stopped striking out the lines I hadn't written. I let them flow, a chorus of watchers stitched into paper. Some entries described things I had never seen: storms hundreds of miles away, fires that burned centuries before, faces of lookouts who manned this tower long before me. I realized then that I was not the first. Others had sat here, watched, endured. Perhaps they had finished their witnessing, folded into the mountain, left behind only pages that now lived in my log. One evening near the end of the month, I looked into the glass and saw not myself but another man, older, gaunt, uniform decades out of date. His eyes met mine with wary recognition, and he raised a hand as if in salute. I raised mine back, breath trembling. Then his reflection stepped backward into the forest of other faces and vanished. The glass showed me again, but I no longer trusted it. How many lookouts had been absorbed here? How many had become the watchers I now glimpsed in the snow? And yet, dread no longer consumed me. What filled me instead was surrender. I was past the point of escape, past the illusion of choice. My post had never been about fire. It had always been about this, about holding vigil until the forest decided I was ready. Ready for what? I still didn't fully know. But as December neared, the phrase appeared bold across the latest page: tomorrow, the finish. I closed the logbook with trembling hands. I blew out the lanterns. And I sat in the dark, listening as the forest drew its breath, waiting for me to open. The final day began without sun. I woke into a lightless sky, a dim gray that pressed against the windows as if dawn had been smothered. Snow had fallen in the night, heavy drifts swallowing the clearing, but I could see the line of the watchers still standing among the trees, their tall bodies stark against the white. They did not move, did not waver. They were waiting, and I knew they were waiting for me. The logbook lay open though I hadn't touched it. One line stretched across both pages, the ink blacker than night today, the finish. My hands hovered above the words, useless, trembling. My chest felt hollow, as though the mountain had scooped my lungs clean and filled the cavity with its own breath. The tower creaked, not from wind but from the slow pulse that had haunted me for months. Inhale, exhale, inhale, each movement tugging at my ribs. I walked the perimeter of the cabin, touching the glass, tracing the frost that spidered outward in patterns too symmetrical to be natural. Each pane bore shapes like eyes, thousands of them, watching in silence. My reflection no longer held my shape alone. It shimmered with the outlines of others, faces pressing through from somewhere deeper. I whispered, "What happens now?" The glass fogged with words, "You open." I sat in the chair at the fire finder, the same place I had begun my vigil months ago. The forest stretched infinite in every direction, ridges stacked against each other, valleys buried in snow, all of it waiting for me to say yes. My duty as a lookout had been to watch for fire. But what I had really been trained for, what I had been shaped for, was this moment to become the fire itself, to open whatever lay sealed between their world and mine. The radio stirred one last time. Static cleared into a voice, not dispatch, not any lookout I had known, but something vast and calm, layered with countless tones. "Elias Mercer, you have done well. We see through you. Open." The tower vibrated, beams rattling, nails shrieking in wood. My teeth hurt from the sound. I pressed the mic to my lips, whispered back, "I don't know how." The voice returned, steady as stone. "You already are." The logbook pages flipped themselves, faster and faster, until they blurred into white. Words formed on every sheet simultaneously. The same phrase scrawled infinite times: "Open, open, open." My chest convulsed. I staggered onto the deck, snow crunching beneath bare feet, the cold meaningless. The watchers shifted at last, every head tilting upward to meet my gaze. Their faceless bodies glowed faint, and in the silence I heard my own heart sensing with theirs. Then the forest breathed in. Every tree bowed inward, every trunk creaked, every branch angled toward the tower. The sound was deafening, a cathedral of lungs filling. I felt my ribs spread wider than bone allowed, felt my skull throb as though seams split. I screamed, but the sound joined theirs, swallowed into the inhale. My vision fractured. I saw not one view but 1,000, every ridge, every valley, every shadowed hollow of this mountain at once. I was above and below, inside and outside, looking down from the sky and up from the roots. The watchers were no longer separate from me. They were extensions of my sight, my breath, my body. The exhale came with fire, not flame that burned wood, but light that scorched through skin and bone. It poured from the forest floor in spirals, from the ridges in fountains, from my own mouth in a column that lit the snow. The fire rolled outward, painting the world gold, but still nothing burned. It was illumination, revelation, and in it I understood. My summer, my months of endurance had not been torment. They had been apprenticeship. The watchers had needed a vessel. They had needed me to watch long enough, to synchronize my gaze with theirs until there was no boundary left. I fell to my knees, palms pressed against the frozen deck. The wood pulsed warm beneath me, alive, throbbing with veins of light. My body shook with currents I could not hold back. I sobbed, not in fear but in surrender. I felt my name slip away, the syllables of Elias Mercer unraveling into wind. What remained was only the watching, endless and complete. The forest exhaled again, softer this time, a sigh of completion. The watchers in the clearing bowed their heads as though satisfied. One by one, they dissolved into the snow, their forms unraveling into ash that blew away on a wind I couldn't feel. The light dimmed, the fire subsided, and the world returned to silence. But I did not return, not fully. My body remained in the tower, trembling, breath ragged. My hands still gripped the deck railing. Yet my vision stretched miles away, across ranges, across rivers, seeing everything at once. Smoke rose on a distant slope, real fire, human fire, and I watched it curl skyward with clarity sharper than binoculars could grant. My duty was unchanged, to witness, to record. Only now, I was no longer a man in a tower. I was the tower. I was the forest. I was the eyes of something older than mountains. I stumbled back inside, legs barely remembering how to move. The logbook waited open on the desk, blank page ready. I picked up the pencil with trembling fingers. The words came steady, not mine alone, but guided. The finish has begun. We see now. We see always. My handwriting blended into theirs until no distinction remained. Page after page filled, and I did not need to read them. They were not for me anymore. They were for whoever came next. As night closed in, I lay on the cot, staring at the ceiling beams. The tower breathed gently, in rhythm with me, or perhaps I with it. The silence was no longer oppressive. It was womb-like, endless, outside. The snow glittered in the faint starlight, and though no figures stood among the trees, I felt them everywhere. They no longer needed to show themselves. They were in me now. I thought about the next lookout who might be sent here. Someone young, eager, thinking solitude was peace. Would the mule train ever come again? Would dispatch ever speak to them honestly? Or would the forest wait, patient, until another set of eyes arrived to be trained, until another name was recorded in the endless log? The thought no longer carried pity, only inevitability. This is how it has always been. This is how it will always be. The night deepened. My eyes closed, but sight remained. Stretched across ridges, valleys, flames, shadows. Sleep and waking no longer mattered. I had opened. I had finished. And in the finish I had become endless. I am Elias Mercer. I was a fire lookout in Montana. The nights are strange here. They will always be strange. That concludes part 6, 1,500 words. The finish fully arrives, and the story closes. Do you want me to draft this as a complete SIPS? Part manuscript is all parts flowing together, so you can keep it as one continuous story file. You have not enough humanizer words left. Upgrade your surfer plan. You said part 3, ChatGPT said. Here's part 3 of your fire lookout story. Flowing continuation, no reintroduction, no 1,500 words. Word count Alfic Hunter. The logbook has become my enemy. I used to write each entry carefully, the date in block letters, coordinates, weather notes. Now I leave the pencil on the desk and walk away, only to return and find a new line where I never wrote. Sometimes the words are half mine, as if I began a sentence but another hand finished it. Sometimes they are not mine at all. One morning I found a paragraph about a storm rolling in from the west, detailed down to the shape of the clouds, but that storm didn't come until 3 days later. The handwriting was indistinguishable from my own. I tried hiding the book, sliding it under the cot, stuffing it in the crate with my dwindling food. Each time it ended up back on the desk, open to a fresh page, as though it demanded to be fed. When I refused, the tower punished me. A night without writing brought footsteps pacing the deck until dawn, heavy, measured, impossible to ignore. Another time I woke to find the trapdoor unlatched, swinging open though I had bolted it. The wind that rushed through carried voices whispering my name. I relented. I wrote. The tower settled again. The more I wrote, the more the words bled into me. I would glance at a sentence and feel not just recognition but memory, as though I had lived the thing described even when I hadn't. A line might read, "The fire is crawling through the canyon, screaming with 1,000 mouths," and though no fire burned, I could smell the char and hear the roar as if it were happening below. The logbook was no longer record, it was instruction. And I was no longer lookout, I was conduit. One evening in early September, fog rolled up from the valley, thick and silver under the moon. I lit the lanterns and closed the shutters, but the fog pressed against the glass until the cabin felt submerged. I heard tapping on the panes, first soft, then insistent, until it matched the rhythm of my pulse. When I forced the shutters open, there were hands in the fog. Dozens of them, palms flat against the glass, fingers dragging as if desperate to be let inside. My knees buckled. I slammed the shutters shut again, but the prints remained, smeared across the glass like oil. That night I dreamed of falling. I wasn't on the tower but inside it, and the entire structure tipped, tumbling end over end into the valley. As we fell, faces pressed against the windows, their mouths opening wider than mouths should. I woke screaming, only to find myself still standing at the fire finder, hand on the sighting device, as if I had been staring through it for hours. The logbook on the desk bore fresh lines: "Do not resist. You are almost ready." The word ready. My name is Daniel Mercer, and I accepted a position as a fire lookout in the remote mountains of central Idaho. It sounded simple when I first read the description. Spend the summer alone in a tower, scan the forest for signs of smoke, and report anything unusual. I was 31 years old, unemployed after my last contracting job fell through, and desperate for work that would get me away from the city and its noise. At first glance, this seemed like a retreat more than a job, a way to breathe crisp air and remind myself that silence still existed in the world. I didn't know yet what kind of silence it would be. The contract had arrived by email, thick with disclaimers, all of them couched in the standard legal jargon. Buried at the bottom of the message, after the salary breakdown and the dates of employment, was a line in plain English that snagged my attention. Follow the rules provided by your supervisor. Do not deviate from them under any circumstances. I assumed it was a reminder not to get drunk on duty or to keep the radio charged. I signed without thinking. The drive to the base station took me through narrow roads that cut between jagged walls of stone and pine, choked valleys. Cell reception disappeared halfway up the mountain, leaving me with nothing but static and my own thoughts. By the time I reached the ranger station, dusk had fallen, painting the peaks in bruised shades of violet. The air smelled of resin and distant rain. A single truck sat outside the building, the kind of government issue white pickup with a cracked windshield and the emblem of the Forestry Service peeling off its side. Inside, the place smelled faintly of coffee gone sour. Behind the desk was a man who looked like he'd been carved from the same timber that built the place. He had a heavy brow, a jaw rough with stubble, and a presence that didn't invite small talk. He introduced himself as Supervisor Harker, though his name tag only read R. Harker. He spoke my name as though he were testing it against some mental ledger. "You're Mercer," he said, not asking. "Yes, sir," I replied. He slid a packet across the desk. It was thin, maybe 10 sheets, stapled unevenly in the corner. On the front in block letters were the words, Part Okal OBSR VLR6. "These are your rules," Harker said. "You'll follow them exactly. Don't improvise. Don't second-guess them. If something doesn't make sense, assume you don't have the full picture." I flipped the cover page. The text wasn't the standard Forest Service guidelines I'd expected. No instructions about weather reports, no checklists about keeping binoculars calibrated. Instead, it was a numbered list written in stark, simple sentences. My eyes snagged on the first few. 1. Never leave the tower between midnight and 4 a.m. under any circumstances. 2. If you hear knocking at the trapdoor after dark, do not respond. 3. Should you see lights in the trees that resemble lanterns, radio me immediately. Do not attempt to make contact. I looked up, half expecting a grin on Harker's face, some acknowledgement that this was a joke played on rookies. He wasn't smiling. "These aren't guidelines," he said. "They're survival instructions." I opened my mouth to ask questions, but his gaze cut them short. "Read them carefully. You'll understand soon enough. Tower 6 is 20 miles north of here. Take the truck. You won't see another human until I come for you in 6 weeks. Radio me at sunrise and sunset every day, no exceptions." The ride to Tower 6 was a blur of dirt roads and switchbacks. By the time I arrived, night had settled in, thick and absolute. The tower rose from a rocky clearing, its silhouette a black tooth against the stars. Inside, the space was sparse: a cot, a wood stove, a desk with a radio, and glass windows on all sides. It felt less like a room, and more like being suspended in a lantern above the forest. The first night passed quietly. I read through the rest of the rules by lantern light, my unease growing with each line. They weren't written like official policy. They were written like warnings etched by someone who'd seen too much. Rule Fade 5 read, "If you notice the trees around the tower swaying, but there is no wind, shut the shutters and do not look outside until morning." Rule Phase 7 was worse. "If you see someone in the clearing waving at you, do not wave back, even if they look like someone you know." By dawn, I'd memorized the first half of them. It wasn't difficult. The human mind locks onto what frightens it. The days blurred into routine. I scanned the horizon for smoke, marked my logs, cooked simple meals on the stove. The radio crackled twice a day when I checked in with Harker, his voice curt, clipped, giving nothing away. The forest below stretched endlessly, a green sea broken only by ridges and river cuts. I should have felt peace, but instead there was a tension humming beneath everything, as though the silence was waiting for me to acknowledge it. On the third night, the first test came. I had been dozing on the cot. The lantern turned low. When the sound reached me, 3 sharp raps against the trapdoor at the base of the tower. My body froze. Rule Fade 2 came back in fulls. "If you hear knocking at the trapdoor after dark, do not respond." The knocks came again, slower this time, as though whoever, or whatever, was there was patient. I sat upright, holding my breath. The only light was the dim glow of the lantern, throwing long shadows against the wooden walls. I glanced at the clock. 20:13 a.m. squarely within the forbidden hours. I waited, counting the beats of my heart, until the knocking stopped. Silence returned, but it was not a comfortable silence. It was the kind that waits just outside the window, pressing in. I didn't sleep again until sunrise. The next morning, I told myself it must have been the wood contracting, or some animal brushing the structure. But when I stepped out onto the deck, I froze. In the dirt at the base of the stairs were prints. Not boots, not paws. Bare human feet, wide and darkened with soil, circling the tower. I didn't report it to Harker. My hand hovered over the radio more than once, but his words echoed. "Don't second guess the rules. Instead, I logged the day as normal and forced myself to believe the prince had been there before. By the fifth night, the forest was no longer just background. It was listening. When the wind died, the trees held themselves unnaturally still, as though waiting for a signal. And sometimes, just before dusk, I caught a faint glow between the trunks, like lantern light swaying where no path existed. That was when I truly realized the rules were not strange. They were necessary. The lantern glow between the trees grew bolder on the sixth night. I had just finished my evening check-in with Harker and was heating a tin of beans on the stove when the shimmer caught my eye. At first, I thought it was a trick of reflection on the glass, a smudge of lamplight bouncing wrong. But then it moved against the slope, weaving between trunks, pausing as though to test if I was watching. I remembered Rule 43. Should you see lights in the trees that resemble lanterns, radio me immediately. Do not attempt to make contact. My hand hovered over the microphone, but fear made me hesitate. I didn't want Harker to think I was panicking at shadows, the rookie crying wolf less than a week in. The light pulsed, faint and rhythmic, as if mimicking a heartbeat. And then it split into two separate points swaying through the forest like partners in some unseen dance. I could feel my pulse in my throat, my breath fogging the glass as I leaned closer. I pressed the button on the radio. "Supervisor, this is Tower 6, I said, trying to keep my voice level. "I've got movement in the southern tree line, lights, lantern-like." Static filled the cabin. For a moment, I thought the line had died. Then Harker's voice came, rougher than usual. "Shut your shutters. All of them. Now." I obeyed instantly. The shutters were heavy plywood boards on hinges, meant for storms. I lowered each one, sealing the tower in darkness, until only the glow of the lantern on my desk remained. The forest vanished. Harker didn't speak again. I sat in that coffin, dark silence for the rest of the night, every board creaking like a held breath. When dawn finally came, I opened the shutters with shaking hands. The clearing was empty. No prints, no sign of visitors. Only the forest, serene and green as though it had been that way forever. I wanted to believe I had imagined it, but deep down I knew I hadn't. Days passed without another sighting. I tried to force myself into rhythm. Cook, scan log, check in, sleep. But the rules sat on the desk like a second presence in the room, their black print louder than any radio crackle. My eyes drifted to Rule 87 more often than I wanted. If you see someone in the clearing waving at you, do not wave back, even if they look like someone you know. That one stuck to me like a burr. I thought of my mother's wave when I left town, my friend's wave when I drove away from the city. Ordinary gestures, made sinister by one line of ink. It was the 10th night when I heard the voice. It came around midnight, when the world below was a canvas of shadows. I had just settled into the cot when the radio crackled, not with static, but with words. At first, I thought it was Harker. "Mercer," it said, low and steady. "Come down." I froze. The voice was mine, my own tone, my own inflections bleeding from the speaker. "You need to come down. It's safe now." I stared at the radio, my blood like ice. Rule 89 surfaced from memory. If you hear your own voice on the radio at night, turn the dial to static and leave it there until sunrise. My hand trembled as I reached for the knob and twisted. White noise roared into the room, a wall of meaningless sound. Still, I swore beneath it, I could hear my words, layered faintly like an echo pressing against glass. I kept the static hissing until the light of dawn broke across the horizon. The next morning, my eyes were raw, my nerves shredded. I told myself I would demand answers from Harker at sunset. When I keyed the mic at the scheduled time, I spat the words before he could even say hello. "What the hell is going on out here?" There was silence, then the faintest sigh. "You've read the rules," he said. "That's not good enough? Something's out there. Why the hell wasn't this in the contract? Why me?" Another long pause. Then, "Because you were willing. That's all it ever takes." Before I could ask more, he signed off, leaving me clutching the mic with white knuckles. The rules weren't just guidelines. They were a barricade, flimsy but necessary, between me and whatever this place harbored. By the 12th day, sleep had become a fragile, broken thing. I jumped at every creak of timber, every gust of wind rattling the shutters. My dreams, when I caught them, were steeped in repetition, knocking at the trapdoor, voices whispering beneath the floorboards, lights swaying just beyond reach, waking and sleeping blurred until both felt equally unreal. Then came the wave. It was afternoon, bright and almost too calm. I was scribbling notes into the logbook when movement caught my eye. Out in the clearing, just beyond the base of the stairs, someone stood. The figure was tall, shoulders hunched slightly, a jacket hanging loosely against the frame. My breath caught as my brain supplied a name: Evan, my younger brother. The likeness was uncanny. The same sharp jaw, the same uneven haircut he never bothered to fix. He raised his arm slowly, deliberately, and waved. The world narrowed to that single gesture. My first instinct was to wave back, to acknowledge him, to believe that somehow he had found his way here. Rule 87 pounded in my scalpel: do not wave back, even if they look like someone you know. I gripped the desk to keep from moving. The figure held the wave, hand tilting side to side in mockery of patience. Then, as though realizing I would not break, he lowered the arm and turned. Without sound, he slipped into the tree line, swallowed by green. I didn't breathe for a long time. My fingers left dents in the wood of the desk. That night, I didn't light the lantern. I sat in complete darkness. The shutters cracked only enough for me to see the stars. My body ached from tension. I wanted to believe I'd hallucinated the whole thing, that isolation had begun to gnaw at my sanity. But when I checked the dirt below at sunrise, the prints were there, bare feet again, circling the tower, and a second set trailing away into the trees. By now, the forest was no longer just scenery. It had intention. The way the branches bent, the way the shadows pooled, it all felt like choreography designed to lure me into breaking one of those rules. I stopped asking why the rules existed. The better question was how long I could keep following them. The 14th night sealed the doubt. I woke to the sound of the trapdoor creaking open. My stomach dropped. Rule 42 had said not to respond to knocking. But this wasn't knocking. This was wood against wood, hinges groaning, the unmistakable sound of the barrier lifting. I sat bolt upright, staring at the square of black in the floor. It yawned open by inches, then held. My mind raced. The rules hadn't mentioned this. They hadn't told me what to do if the door didn't just beckon, but opened on its own. Something shifted in the dark gap. The faint scrape of skin on wood. Then a hand emerged, thin, gray, with too many knuckles, dragging itself onto the first rung of the ladder. I couldn't move. My body locked, as though any sound would draw it further. The hand paused, flexed, then retreated. The door slammed shut hard enough to rattle the windows. I sat there until morning, drenched in sweat, every nerve screaming. When light finally bled across the mountains, I staggered to the desk, grabbed the rule sheet, and flipped through it again, desperate to find something I had missed. At the bottom, in faded ink I swore hadn't been there before, was a new line. Rule Phelan Unrenzen. If the trapdoor opens on its own, do not interfere. Wait, it will close. I stared at the paper until the words blurred. The new rule wasn't typed in the same neat black as the others. It was thinner, almost handwritten, though no pen had touched the page. I wanted to tear it up, throw it into the stove, pretend it hadn't appeared. but the weight of what I'd seen the night before, the gray hand, the shifting knuckles, the trapdoor closing by its own will, anchored me in the belief that the rules weren't suggestions. They were alive, changing as the forest changed, binding me into a contract I hadn't agreed to but was already trapped inside. When I finally keyed the radio that morning, my voice shook. Harker. Something's wrong with the sheet. A new rule. It wasn't there before. There was silence, then the faint drag of his breath. "Don't question the list," he said flatly. "You're still alive, aren't you? That means it works." I wanted to scream at him, demand answers, but something in his tone froze me. He knew more than he'd ever admit, and my only lifeline was his voice crackling through static. So I swallowed the fury, logged my report, and signed off. The days blurred again. The forest pressed closer. The light shifted strangely in the afternoons, elongating shadows until they looked like bodies hanging between the trees. The wind carried whispers I couldn't decipher. Some nights I swore I smelled smoke, faint and acrid, though no fire burned. I clung to the list like it was scripture, reciting the rules in my head until I knew them better than my own name. On the 17th night, something changed. I had fallen into a shallow, restless sleep when a sound broke through the fog of dreams music. Not loud, not crisp, but distant, as if carried on the wind from a far-off carnival. A Calliope tune, lilting and wrong, weaving through the pines. I sat upright, heart slamming. It wasn't in the rules. No mention of music. No guidance for what to do if the forest started singing. I crept to the window, peering through the glass. The clearing below was bathed in moonlight. At its edge stood three shapes. They were tall, impossibly tall, their limbs long enough to brush the ground, even as they stood upright. Each one held something glowing, swinging in slow arcs. Lanterns, or maybe not lanterns at all. The light wasn't fire. It was pale, greenish, like the glow of fungus on rotting wood. The music grew louder, though their movements made no sound. I backed away from the window, nearly tripping over the cot. My first instinct was the radio, but as I reached for it, words burned in my mind, as though whispered into my ear, "Don't call him. Don't call anyone." I froze. The voice wasn't mine, wasn't Harker's. It was something else. I dropped the mic as if it had burned me and dove for the shutters, slamming them down one by one until the tower was sealed again. The music didn't stop. It pressed through the wood, curling around me, teasing my nerves like plucked strings. I sat against the wall, eyes squeezed shut, whispering the rules aloud like a prayer until dawn. When the first light seeped in, the music ceased. I opened the shutters with trembling hands. The clearing was empty. The forest looked harmless again, but the memory of that tune stuck like a splinter in my brain. Later that morning, I checked the paper again, and there it was, another edition in that faint, not quite ink. Rule 44: if you hear music, close the shutters. Do not seek the source. I laughed, sharp and bitter. It wasn't hysteria, not yet, but close. The rules weren't being written for me. They were being written because of me, adjusting to what I encountered, anticipating the next horror. When I reported that day, I didn't mention the music. I didn't want to hear Harker's evasions again. Instead, I asked the question that had gnawed at me since the beginning. "Supervisor, how many others before me?" The pause was long enough I thought he'd cut the transmission. Then, enough to learn the rules. Not enough to make them permanent. His voice clicked out. That was all I got. Enough. That night, I didn't sleep. I watched the forest instead, waiting for whatever came next. The silence was worse than the noise, because it meant anticipation, a coiled spring ready to snap. Around 2 in the morning, the knocking returned. 3 raps against the trapdoor, deliberate and patient. I didn't move, didn't breathe. The knocks came again, then silence. I almost relaxed. Then came the whisper. Right beneath the floorboards, pressed against the wood, my own voice spoke. "Daniel, let me in." I shook my head, teeth clenched so hard my jaw hurt. Another whisper, this one in a voice I hadn't heard in years, my father's. "Son, it's cold out here. Open up." Tears pricked my eyes. He had been dead for a decade, gone before I turned 20. The tone was perfect, down to the rasp of his smoker's cough. I clutched the rule sheet with white, knuckled hands, searching desperately for guidance. There was nothing. No line about voices beneath the floor. No instruction for when the dead came calling. For the first time, the list failed me. The whispers grew louder, overlapping, a chorus of familiar voices. Friends, family, all pressing, begging, demanding I let them in. My vision blurred with panic. I backed into the corner, slid down until I was curled on the floor, palms pressed to my ears. Then, as suddenly as it began, it stopped. When I dared to look at the paper again, in the pale wash of dawn, there it was, Rule 513E. If they speak beneath the floor, do not answer, do not acknowledge. Survive until dawn. The edges of the page were worn now, the corners softening as though it had been handled for years instead of weeks. I thought of the others who must have clutched their own copies, waiting for new lines to appear, praying the rules came quickly enough to save them. I thought of those who hadn't lasted, who broke under the weight of temptation or fear. That day, the forest didn't look beautiful anymore. It looked like a cage. And the tower wasn't safety. It was a trap dangling above something patient enough to wait me out. By the 20th day, the rules had become less a lifeline and more a chain. I couldn't act without checking them, couldn't think without reciting them. I was living in reaction, never in control, and that was when I realized the real terror. The forest wasn't just trying to kill me. It was trying to break me into something that fit. That night, as the sun bled away, I whispered aloud to the empty cabin, "What happens if I don't follow them?" For a long moment, the silence held. Then, faintly, the radio crackled. Not Harker's voice, not mine, but something low and hungry, chuckling through the static. "You'll see." I didn't sleep. Couldn't. I sat upright in the dark, every muscle locked, staring at the trapdoor, waiting for it to rise again. By the 21st day, the rules were coming faster than I could prepare for them. Each dawn, when the forest light spilled across the desk, a new line waited for me in that faint, uncanny script. They never appeared while I was watching, but always when my guard slipped, like the page was being updated by something that knew the gaps in my focus. The newest one, that morning raid rule, Fave warned through in a, "If you dream of leaving the tower, do not act on it when you wake. The dream is not yours." I stared at it for a long time, stomach hollow. The night before, I had dreamed of descending the stairs, of walking through the trees under a sky filled with strange stars. The forest had seemed welcoming, familiar, even beautiful in a way it never was by day. I had woken with a kind of ache, a longing to step outside and breathe the air beyond the clearing. That longing hadn't left me, even as I read the rule. I realized then how insidious this place was. It didn't just frighten, it seduced. It wanted me to step out willingly, to give myself up without a fight. The rules were a barricade not just against horror, but against temptation. That afternoon, I keyed the radio at check, in and spoke before Harker could. "The rules are multiplying," I said. "How many are there? How far does this go?" For the first time, he sounded tired, almost brittle. "As many as it takes." "Until what?" I pressed. He didn't answer. Static swallowed his voice, leaving me with nothing but the hiss of emptiness. That night, the dream came again. I walked barefoot through moss, moonlight pouring like milk between branches that bent low to guide me. In the dream, the rules didn't exist. There was no fear, no threat, just peace. When I woke, my body ached as if I had been climbing stairs all night. My hands trembled with the urge to open the trapdoor. Only the memory of Rule 514 kept me seated on the cot until dawn. By the 25th day, food tasted like ash. The beans, the rice, the canned fruit, all of it dulled, lifeless. I wondered if it was rot, or if the forest was stripping joy from everything I touched. Even water from the tower's tank carried a metallic tang. I forced myself to swallow it anyway, knowing that hunger and thirst would do the forest's work for it if I faltered. It was the 26th night when the tower itself turned against me. I had just shuttered the windows when the floor beneath me began to tremble. At first, I thought it was an earthquake, but the tremors were rhythmic, pulsing like a heartbeat. The boards shivered beneath my feet, rattling the lantern on the desk until it toppled and went out. In the sudden darkness, the tower moaned, a long groan of timber bending against pressure. I bolted upright, clutching the rule sheet in the dark. There was nothing on it about this, no line that told me what to do when the tower itself felt alive, when the walls closed in and the floor rippled underfoot. Then, just as my lungs burned from holding my breath, new words bled across the bottom of the page. Rule 44. If the tower shakes, do not run. Hold still, it will pass. I obeyed. I pressed myself against the wall, every nerve screaming to flee, to throw open the trapdoor and escape. But I held. The shaking rose to a violent shudder, then slowed, then ceased altogether. The boards lay quiet once more. My legs buckled, and I slid to the floor, clutching the paper like a lifeline. The next morning, the forest looked different. The trees were closer. I knew they shouldn't be. 20 feet of open clearing separated the tower from the first line of trunks. But they loomed nearer now, branches dipping low enough to brush the railings. Shadows stretched further across the ground, as though the sun itself had been dragged into a new position. By the 30th day, the isolation had hollowed me out. My thoughts came slow, words slippery in my mouth. I spoke less to Harker, my reports clipped to bare essentials. He didn't seem to mind. Once, I thought I heard him whisper something just before signing off, too faint to catch. I tried to call him back, but the line was dead. On the 32nd night, the music returned. This time it wasn't the lilting carnival tune. It was a low, steady hum, a single note vibrating through the wood and glass. My teeth ached with it. I clamped my hands over my ears, but the sound wasn't in my ears. It was in my bones. The paper waited on the desk. I didn't want to look, didn't want to see the inevitable new edition, but I couldn't help myself. When I turned my head, the faint ink was already there. Rule 44: if the forest hums, do not move. Let it search. The hum swelled until the glass rattled. Shadows shifted beyond the shutters, shapes too tall, too thin, brushing past the tower as though circling prey. The air grew heavy, pressing down on me like water. My lungs begged for movement, for air, but I stayed still. Minutes stretched into hours until, at last, the hum faded. When dawn came, I opened the shutters. The clearing was different again. The dirt was covered in footprints, dozens of them, pressed deep into the soil. Not boots, not bare human feet either. Each one had too many toes, too long, trailing off into clawed tips. They circled the tower, leading in and out of the trees in spiraling patterns. I didn't call Harker that morning. What could I say? That something was tightening its grip around Tower 6, pushing closer each night. That the rules were being written faster, as though the forest itself was testing me with greater hunger. He would only say the same words, "Don't question the list." On the 35th day, I woke to find the paper different. Not just a new rule, but the entire page rewritten. The font was sharper, the lines darker, the rules reordered. Some were missing. You will not leave until you are dismissed. Rule Fate 2A: if something calls to you, ignore it. Rule 3, if the forest moves, stay still. Rule 4, if the door opens, do not go through. The rest trailed off into half-formed sentences, smears of ink that dissolved into nothing. My chest tightened. The paper wasn't just updating. It was rewriting me into a different set of rules. When I tried to call Harker that evening, the line didn't connect. The radio hissed and spit, but no voice came back. I called again at dawn, then at dusk. Nothing. The realization sank in like ice. I was alone now. Not just physically, but severed. Whatever had kept me tethered to another human had been cut. The forest had what it wanted. Me. Bound to a shifting list that would tighten around my throat until I either obeyed it completely or broke beneath it. That night, the trapdoor opened again. But this time, nothing reached through. No gray hand, no whisper. Just a hollow, beckoning silence. The air pulled upward from the gap, carrying with it the scent of pine and rot. I gripped the desk, my whole body straining against the temptation to descend, to end this vigil, to step into whatever waited below. And then the page changed once more, right before my eyes. The letters burned dark and certain across the bottom. Rule 17E, when the silence comes, do not move. Do not speak, do not breathe. I obeyed. I sat frozen in the dark until the trapdoor slammed shut again. When dawn came, I realized my lungs still burned, my throat raw. I hadn't breathed for longer than should have been possible, and yet I lived, for now. By the 36th day, I wasn't sure whether the tower was keeping me alive or feeding me to something I couldn't name. The rules had stopped arriving in neat increments. They appeared whenever they pleased. Sometimes at dawn, sometimes in the middle of the night, sometimes burning across the page in letters, so faint I had to squint until my eyes watered. I'd begun to fear the page itself more than the forest. At least the forest showed its teeth in the form of lantern lights, knocking, whispers. The paper was sly, insidious, rewriting reality beneath my nose. Each new line meant some horror I hadn't faced yet, some test waiting outside the tower. On the 37th morning, I woke to find the sheet nearly covered. Rules stretched from top to bottom, some repeating themselves, others contradicting what came before. One in the middle read, "Do not trust Rule 44. Another said, "If the ink turns red, burn the page." The problem was, I didn't know which lines were permanent and which were bait. Was the list protecting me or manipulating me? My hands shook as I traced the words, trying to memorize them, but they slipped away like water through fingers. That afternoon, I made a mistake. It was small, so small I almost convinced myself it didn't count. I was scanning the ridges when movement caught my eye. A figure stood at the tree line, half in shadow. Not waving, not beckoning, just standing. The angle of the shoulders, the slope of the head. It looked exactly like me. My own reflection carved into flesh. The rules had said nothing about this. Waving, yes. Voices, yes. But not this. Not a double waiting in the trees. I should have shut the shutters. Should have looked away. Instead, I stared. My reflection tilted its head at the same moment I did. But then, slowly, its mouth stretched wide. Too wide. Wider than skin should allow. Rows of teeth unfolded like blades catching the sun. I stumbled back, knocking over the chair. When I looked again, it was gone. That night, a new line scrawled across the bottom of the sheet. Rule 18E, if you see yourself outside, do not look too long. I had failed it already. The following days blurred into a haze of sleepless hours and gnawing dread. Food ran lower, and what remained tasted fuller each time. I rationed water, my tongue dry and cracked. The forest pressed closer. Branches scraped against the windows. Shadows shifted across the walls even when the lantern was out. I stopped opening the shutters during the day. The trees felt too close, their bark writhing with faces I almost recognized. On the 40th day, the radio crackled back to life. "Mercer, The voice was Harker's, but faint, distorted. Relief hit me so hard I nearly wept. I grabbed the mic, clutching it like salvation. "I'm here. I'm still here. The rules, they're changing. It won't stop." Static swallowed him. Then his voice returned, low and urgent. "Burn the list." I froze. Burn it. That was the only thing keeping me alive. I thought of Rule 81, the original version. Never leave the tower between midnight and 4 a.m. If I destroyed the paper, would I still remember them all? Could I trust myself not to falter? "Burn it," Harker repeated. Then the line cut dead. I stared at the stove for a long time. My hands trembled as I fed a scrap of kindling into the fire, the page clutched in the other hand. I couldn't do it. If I destroyed it, and the rules vanished from my memory, I'd be defenseless. And yet a sick part of me wondered if keeping it was the very thing feeding the forest, letting it write itself deeper into me. That night, the trapdoor opened again. Silence poured up through the gap, heavy and waiting. I pressed my back to the wall, clutching the rule sheet like a shield. And then the letters began to move. Not just new ones appearing, but the entire page shifting, rearranging into a single sentence written over and over. Openin, The. I squeezed my eyes shut, heart pounding. The boards groaned under pressure, as though something vast and heavy pressed against the ladder. The air stank of soil and rot. I lasted until dawn, but when the light broke, the trapdoor was still ajar. I forced it shut with both hands, the wood warm as though touched by flesh. The paper that morning was blank. Every rule, every line, gone. I almost collapsed. The page that had dictated every breath of my existence for 5 weeks was now empty. A clean slate. My first thought was relief, but terror replaced it quickly. Did the absence mean I was free, or that the forest had no more need of instructions? That day, I paced the tower until my legs ached. I tried the radio, calling Harker over and over, but only static replied. By evening, exhaustion overtook me. I collapsed onto the cot, clutching the blank paper like it still meant something. And then I dreamed. I was standing in the clearing, barefoot, the dirt cool against my skin. The forest was quiet, serene. The tower loomed above me, windows dark, shutters closed. In the dream, I climbed the stairs slowly, every step echoing. When I reached the top, I opened the trapdoor and pulled myself inside. The tower was empty. No lantern, no cot, no stove. Just walls covered floor to ceiling with rules scrawled in black. Hundreds of them, thousands, looping endlessly. Some I recognized, others were gibberish. At the center of the room stood a figure hunched over the desk, writing. It was me. I woke with a scream, the paper clutched in my hand. Except it wasn't blank anymore. Across the top, in jagged black, was one new line rule. Mindinin, you are the one writing. I dropped it like it was venomous, stumbling back against the wall. My skin crawled, my head buzzing with a memory I wasn't sure was real. Had I dreamed that figure? Or had I been standing outside the tower looking in? For the rest of the day, I didn't touch the paper. I left it on the desk, its single line facing the ceiling like an accusation. By nightfall, the hunger in my belly had grown sharp, but the thought of eating turned my stomach. I was unraveling. Thread by thread, the 44th night, I heard footsteps inside the tower. Not below, not outside, inside. They paced across the floorboards while I sat rigid on the cot, every muscle locked. The lantern was dim, casting long shadows that wavered with each creak of the wood. I forced myself to turn my head. The desk chair was occupied. Someone sat hunched over the rule sheet, shoulders bent, hand moving in quick, scratching motions. The lantern light glinted off pale skin, stretched too thin over bones. Its head turned slowly, and I saw my own face staring back, eyes hollow, mouth slack. I blinked and it was gone. The chair empty, the paper blank again. I wanted to run. I wanted to throw myself down the stairs and into the forest, even if it meant being torn apart. But the rules, or the absence of them, still held me in place. Obedience had become my only muscle memory. When dawn came, the paper bore one final line: Rule fait, do not forget who you are. It was the first rule that didn't sound like a command. It sounded like a plea. I didn't know if it was written by the forest, by Harker, or by myself. Maybe all three. Maybe it didn't matter. Because by then, I wasn't sure who I was anymore. By the 45th day, I no longer trusted the sun. It rose too late, set too early, dragging shadows longer than they should stretch. Sometimes when I blinked, I swore there were two suns, pale and weak, orbiting each other in a sky I didn't recognize. The forest below had shifted too. The clearing was smaller, the tree line pressed nearly against the tower. Branches brushed the windows in the breeze, though the rules had taught me enough to know there was no breeze. The paper sat on the desk, the single line glaring at me. Rule fait 20, do not forget who you are. It was different than the others. Not a command of survival, but something deeper, personal. Yet it frightened me more than the rest, because what if I already had forgotten? What if the forest had stripped me down so far that Daniel Mercer was only a name left on a piece of paper? The hunger gnawed sharper every hour. Supplies were nearly gone. Tins scraped clean, water turning rancid. My ribs pressed against my skin, my hands shook with weakness. It was no longer just fear that could kill me. It was my own body collapsing. On the 46th night, the forest knocked again. Not at the trapdoor, not on the walls, but directly on the windows. A sharp, insistent tapping that traveled from pane to pane, circling me. I clutched the paper, whispering the rules aloud, though most had vanished. Don't answer. Don't move. Don't breathe. My voice broke into sobs, my throat raw. The knocking stopped. In the silence that followed, a voice whispered through the glass, "Daniel, you've done so well. Just one more rule." I froze. The paper lay blank before me, the ink beginning to crawl again. My chest tightened as new words etched themselves across the page. Rule fait 20 once and opened the door when called. I shook my head violently, the lantern rattling on the desk. No, that breaks everything. The rules said. My own voice cracked. The rules had said not to open the trapdoor, not to leave the tower. But the forest was rewriting its contract, dangling escape like bait. I paced the cabin, mind unraveling. If I followed this new rule, was I obeying or betraying the old ones? If I disobeyed, was I clinging to a set of lies that had only ever meant to cage me? At midnight, the trapdoor creaked open again. Not violently this time, but gently, almost tender, like a parent opening a bedroom door to check on their child. A soft glow rose from below, lantern light, green and pulsing. The smell of earth drifted up, damp and rich, strangely comforting. The radio crackled behind me. Harker's voice, ragged, almost broken. "Mercer, do not go down. Whatever it says, whatever it shows you, stay inside. This is the last test." Tears blurred my vision. Then why did the rules change? I screamed into the static. Why does it tell me to open the door now? Silence. Then, because it knows you're tired. The line went dead. I staggered to the trapdoor, staring into the glow. My own reflection stared back from the black wood of the ladder, warped and grinning. The hunger in my body screamed for release, for anything but another night of endurance. My fingers curled around the edge. The paper changed again. Rule cater table. Choose, that was it. No command, no direction, just a demand. My breath rattled in my lungs. Every rule before had been survival by obedience. Now it demanded something else. Responsibility. Maybe the final trap was choice itself. I shut my eyes. Thought of my brother's wave, my father's voice beneath the floor, my own double grinning at me from the trees. None of it was real. Or maybe all of it was. But the rules had always been about one thing, keeping me inside. I let go of the trapdoor and stumbled back, collapsing against the wall. The glow below pulsed angry now, the air shaking with it. A sound rose from the forest. Not knocking. Not music, but a chorus of screams woven together, my voice among them. The tower shook, timbers groaning, glass rattling. The paper burned on the desk without flame, the words searing brighter until they vanished in ash. The trapdoor slammed shut, hard enough to rattle dust from the rafters. Then silence. When dawn broke, the clearing was empty again. The trees had retreated, leaving 20 feet of open dirt, as though nothing had ever pressed closer. The air was clean, sharp with morning. The paper was gone. In its place on the desk sat my radio log, open to the first page. My own handwriting filled it from start to finish. Every line of every rule scrawled by my hand. I turned the pages with trembling fingers, and each bore my script, not the faint ink I'd grown used to. Had I written them all along? Had Harker ever existed? Or had the forest used my own mind to trap me, to feed itself on my obedience? The radio crackled once more, faint and steady, a voice calm and unfamiliar. Tower 6, this is base. Rotation's over. Your relief will arrive today. Good work, look out. I stared at the mic, unable to move. My throat worked, but no words came out. Hours passed. By noon, a white truck appeared at the edge of the clearing, sunlight glinting off the windshield. A man climbed out, young, clean, shaven, carrying a duffel bag slung over his shoulder. He shaded his eyes against the sun, looking up at the tower. He raised his hand and waved. Every muscle in my body locked. Rule 47 thundered through me. If you see someone in the clearing waving at you, do not wave back. The wave held, patient, almost cheerful. The man shouted, "You must be Mercered." "I'm here for the next shift." I stood at the window, trembling, unable to tell whether this was freedom or the cruelest trick of all. The rules were gone, the page ash, but they lived in me now, carved deeper than bone. My hand twitched at my side, aching to rise, to wave back, to prove I was still human. But I didn't. I couldn't. I only watched, and the forest watched with me.